Chapter 3104. Those six tribulation experts who were constantly transcending naturally did not know how many worlds were waiting for them to transcend. In the beginning, every time they transcended into a world, they comforted themselves that this was the last world. The next time they transcended, they would be able to come into contact with the core of the island and discover the hidden secrets of the island. However, the reality was that they died again and again. After repeating this hundreds of times, they no longer thought about which world they had transcended into. Although they were not numb to it now, many of them gradually had the intention to retreat. The reason why they did not retreat was because of the unwillingness in their hearts and the coercion of their bodies. If it were not for these, at least half of these six tribulation experts would have run away. It's a pity that they still have a chance to leave now. If they advance a few more times, I'm afraid they won't even have a chance to leave. Someone among the six tribulation expert side. They were experienced people and had helped the island branch for so many years, so they naturally knew some of the fundamental rules of the island. Any living creature, as long as it stepped into the island branch, would naturally be accepted by the island and would have the authority of a native creature on the island. However, in the beginning, this degree of acceptance was actually quite limited. In other words, although he was accepted, he was still in a state of probation. In this state, living creatures could obviously still leave the island branch. However, this trial period would not be too long. As time passed, the trial period would gradually pass. The island's acceptance of living creatures would naturally increase. At a certain moment, this degree of acceptance would reach the extreme, and the living creatures would be completely integrated with the island branch. At that time, living creatures would not be able to leave the island branch unless they happened to fit a certain mechanism reserved by the island. Apart from using that reserved mechanism, there was no other way to leave the island branch. Even if that living creature was a six tribulation expert, it would not be able to get rid of this restriction. The surrounding six tribulation powerhouses were all extremely certain about this, because they were still on the island, which was the best proof. Obviously, apart from transcending and entering the first level of the town master's path, this branch of the island did not have any mechanism prepared for the creatures who left this island. If it was a cultivator who had not entered the first level of the Down Master's path, he could naturally use this mechanism to transcend and enter the first level of the Down Master's path. However, it was obvious that only they could enter it. Experts of the six tribulations who had already ascended and left the first level of the Town Master's path obviously did not have the opportunity to take such a path. Although the island itself was not stingy and gave them the opportunity to enter the first level of the path of Down Master. However, the road to becoming a Down Master would not give them a chance to enter. Compared to the Down Master's path, even if it was only the first level of the Down Master's path, this branch island was obviously far inferior, no matter which aspect it was. Therefore, the approval of the island branch was obviously irrelevant to the first level of the Down Master's path. It was impossible for them to enter the first level of the Down Master's path just because the island branch agreed to let them enter. According to the calculations of the six tribulations experts who were watching, the time that the six tribulations experts who were transcending and staying in this branch island was getting closer and closer to the time when they would be completely integrated by the island branch. Naturally, the six tribulations experts who were constantly transcending were completely unaware of this. Although many of them had the intention to retreat for various reasons, none of them really took action and tried to leave the island branch. Because they did not try to leave, they naturally did not feel the restrictions of the island on them. While they were still in a daze, the time slowly approached. At a certain moment, the six tribulations experts who were watching in the nothingness in the depths of the island branch sighed secretly. It seems that they have really followed in our footsteps. A six tribulations expert sighed. There was some sadness in his expression, but there was also some inexplicable schadenfreude in his expression. At this moment, the expressions of the six tribulations experts in the nothingness suddenly changed. It turned out that in this nothingness, there was suddenly a wonderful change that had appeared a long time ago, but disappeared soon after it appeared. It seemed that the entire nothingness was communicating with some kind of existence in the outside world. It once again appeared in this nothingness and appeared in their sensing range. It appeared again. At this time, the Six Tribulations experts could not help but become inexplicably excited. Whether it was the Six Tribulations experts who wanted to leave this island branch, or the experts who did not intend to leave this island branch and planned to continue to study the mysteries of this island branch, they were all excited by the wonderful communication that appeared in this nothingness at this time. For the Six Tribulations experts who wanted to leave this island branch, the appearance of this situation was equivalent to the island branch once again, and the time when the world they created would become the foundation of a certain island branch was approaching. And once this happened, they would naturally be able to directly leave the new island branch with the help of their ability to control the foundation of the island branch and directly obtain the freedom that they had been longing for billions of years. How could this not make them excited? And for the Six Tribulations experts who did not intend to leave this island branch and wanted to further explore the mysteries of this island branch, the appearance of this communication clearly meant that some mysteries of this island branch had been revealed to them, so they naturally became even more excited. This kind of communication was so mysterious that it felt as if the entire nothingness, and who knew how many worlds above this nothingness were going on at the same time. At every moment, there seemed to be endless existences constantly flowing into the outside world through this kind of communication, and also constantly being absorbed from the outside world. In this process, many Six Tribulations experts could feel that their bodies and minds seemed to merge into this kind of communication. It was as if they were also carrying out some kind of indescribable communication with some incomparably vast, incomparably brilliant existence in the outside world at all times. This is because a large part of this world was created by me. Sensing this feeling of also participating in this kind of communication, these Six Tribulations experts each had their own understanding in their hearts. This kind of communication was certainly thousands of times more grand and vast than the kind of communication they had sensed before. However, in essence, the nature of these two kinds of communication was the same. Previously, they did not feel that they were also participating in this kind of communication and were also a node in this kind of communication. But now they felt this way. This was very clearly brought about by what they had done before. In other words, it was because they had opened up a large amount of land for the island that they were on that their treatment had changed so much. After who knew how long, it seemed like billions of years, but also like just a few breaths of time. An inexplicable understanding appeared in these Six Tribulations experts' hearts. This is the communication with the sea of nothingness. With this understanding, they suddenly felt that the endless, indescribable existence that had flowed through them during the countless communication processes had instantly undergone an earth-shattering change, turning into all sorts of indescribable information that continuously surged out from the depths of their hearts. With this endless information, these Six Tribulations experts suddenly felt that their cultivation realm, which had not changed in a long time, involuntarily climbed up a little bit. This change instantly shocked those Six Tribulations experts. After all, they were already Six Tribulations experts now. Any progress in cultivation realm could only be achieved after a long period of time, in a way that even they themselves could not feel the progress bit by bit. But now suddenly, they felt that their cultivation realm had suddenly increased in a way that they could feel. This situation, to them, was simply a complete subversion of their worldview. Since they stepped onto the path of Tao Master, it had been billions of years since they had felt such a huge and obvious improvement. In fact, even those places of opportunity that were fought over during the war could not allow them to make such obvious improvements. But now, in such a branch of this island, they had made such a huge improvement in such a short period of time. How could they not be shocked? Maybe I should reconsider. Those Six Tribulations experts who had originally planned to leave this island branch and obtain their dream freedom began to have different ideas at this time. After all, for Six Tribulations experts, cultivation was the most important thing. For the sake of cultivation, they could even sit for billions of years without moving. For the sake of cultivation, they were even willing to slaughter all living beings and destroy billions of worlds. Under such circumstances, now that they could make such a huge improvement in their cultivation realm on this island, for them, all kinds of restrictions and all kinds of treatment of being treated as coolies were no longer so unbearable. At this time, a large number of Six Tribulations experts continuously appeared in this void, awakening those Six Tribulations experts who had obtained great benefits from the exchange, causing them to turn their eyes to where these new Six Tribulations experts were. It seems that we have finally found the culprit. At this time, a Six Tribulations expert who had just appeared showed an inexplicable look on his face and said faintly. At the same time, the eyes of other Six Tribulations experts inexplicably became a little dangerous. The reason for this was actually very simple, because they had already sensed a very familiar aura from the dozens of Six Tribulations experts in this void, the aura that they had sensed in countless worlds that they had passed through. There was obviously only one possibility for this situation, and that was that these Six Tribulations experts in the void were the creators of countless worlds that had tortured them to the point of begging for death. In other words, the existences that they had cursed countless times before. However, very soon, these Six Tribulations experts turned their gazes to the void around them. However, they had also sensed that the void was communicating with some sort of existence in the outside world. This kind of communication. All of them felt that this kind of communication contained endless mysteries and principles. It would be of great benefit to them. However, it was a pity that they couldn't feel themselves participating in the exchange like the Six Tribulation powerhouses. Thus, they couldn't absorb the benefits contained in the exchange like the Six Tribulation powerhouses could. At this moment, they only knew that this kind of communication was extremely mysterious. Perhaps this was what they were looking for, the secret contained in this island. With this understanding, why would they still care about who those dozens of Six Tribulations experts were, why they had appeared here, and what was the purpose of opening up so many worlds? At this moment, their attention had already been completely attracted by the communication around them. They wanted to pour all of their energy into that communication and completely dig out all the secrets contained in that communication. So it's been so long. At this moment, the dozens of Six Tribulation powerhouses who were originally in the void looked at the tens of thousands of Six Tribulation powerhouses who had just joined them in confusion. They all understood how much time they had experienced when they were part of the communication node. Clearly, according to the speed at which those Six Tribulation experts transcended time and time again, it would take at least 100 million years for them to transcend from the hundreds of layers of heaven and earth to this place of nothingness beneath all heaven and earth. In this case, they had obviously been immersed in that state for at least 100 million years. Faced with this situation, those Six Tribulations experts felt a little confused. I suddenly feel a little regretful. A Six Tribulations expert sighed. Regretful about what? After fighting together for such a long time, these Six Tribulations experts had clearly accumulated a rather deep friendship with each other. At this moment, a Six Tribulations expert asked this. I regret opening up too few space-times before. If I had opened up more space-times, the harvest might have been even greater. The Six Tribulations expert who said that he regretted said this at this moment. His words made the eyes of the dozens of Six Tribulations experts brighten. Chapter 3105. I'm going to continue. At this moment, a Six Tribulation powerhouse who was about to leave while the island was branching off again sighed. When he said this, his expression was rather complicated. It seemed like he was emotionally unwilling, but his rational judgment forced him to make such a decision. The expressions of the other Six Tribulation powerhouses all changed slightly. Most of the Six Tribulation powerhouses who were planning to leave changed their plans and decided to continue following this branch of the island so that they could once again experience the process of the communication node and absorb the nutrients that could allow their cultivation realm to soar. At this moment, the Six Tribulation powerhouses who had just entered the void had completely ignored the dozens of onlookers. Although they were unable to integrate into the communication between the void and some kind of incredible existence in the outside world, they could still clearly feel the mysteriousness and profoundness of this communication. This feeling was like looking at a huge object through a layer of frosted glass. Because of the frosted glass, ordinary people couldn't see what the huge object was at all. However, no matter how bad one's eyesight was, they could sense whether the gigantic creature was dangerous or safe from its movements and silhouette at this moment. These 6 tribulation powerhouses were like this. Although they couldn't truly integrate into the communication like the dozens of 6 tribulation powerhouses, with their own perception and their own understanding of cultivation, they could still feel that the communication contained the profoundness that was of great benefit to them. Because of this, they just cast aside the 6 tribulation powerhouses that they believe had tormented them for tens of millions of years. 6 tribulation powerhouses were 6 tribulation powerhouses, after all. As 6 tribulation powerhouses, they obviously paid more attention to everything related to cultivation. Compared to everything related to cultivation, everything else could stand aside. What exactly is this? In the end, after a long time of not being able to figure out what the communication meant, these 6 tribulation powerhouses finally got scared. One of the 6 tribulation powerhouses directly came up to the dozens of 6 tribulation powerhouses to interrogate them. The dozens of 6 tribulation powerhouses looked at each other and all smiled. Then, another 6 tribulation powerhouse came out and said, "This is the true secret of this island. You should be able to sense the profoundness of this exchange, but no matter what you do, you are unable to obtain the true benefits, right?" Seeing that he was willing to talk, the powerhouse who came to interrogate him didn't push it too far. He took a step back and said, "That's right. Do you have anything to teach me? Back then, we were just like your class. We could only feel this kind of communication, but we couldn't learn anything from it. However, the situation soon changed. Of course, it's very fast for the outside world." The 6 tribulation expert who came out to answer smiled mysteriously. The dozens of other 6 tribulation experts standing with him also had strange smiles on their faces. All of them had decided to participate in the work of perfecting the island's branches once again, but it was obvious that this work was too arduous. It was so bitter that even they found it somewhat unbearable. Because they were satisfied with the final reward, they could not break away from the almost unbearable work. However, this did not mean that they could not reduce the difficulty of this kind of work. Pulling other 6 tribulation experts into this kind of hard work was obviously a good way to reduce the degree of hardship they felt. And this was also what these 6 tribulation experts were doing at this time. That is, when this island branches again, help the island branch to be perfected once more. When the island branch is perfected once more, you will get a chance to completely integrate into that kind of exchange. At that time, you will naturally be able to obtain endless nourishment from that exchange. The 6 tribulation expert who answered didn't delay for long. He directly told the tens of thousands of 6 tribulation experts the answer. Hearing his words, those 6 tribulation experts all had an ominous premonition. Help the island branch to be perfected? At first, it didn't sound like much. However, thinking back to the countless worlds they had experienced before, they all felt that this matter wasn't that simple. Oh, I forgot to mention just now. Helping the island branch to be perfected once more is to let all the space-time in the island branch transform into a world. Let every layer of the island branch become a real world. The 6 tribulation expert who answered continued, "How much space-time will there be after the island branch?" The 6 tribulation expert who came out to inquire caught the key point and asked, "There is no space-time. The island branch only has heaven and earth. There is no space-time. If you want to know how many layers there are on the island branch, you will need to open up some space-time yourself and then nurture it into a world." The 6 tribulation expert who answered smiled. "Is that so? That seems good." The 6 tribulation expert who asked the question heaved a sigh of relief. He only felt that this matter didn't seem to be as difficult as he had imagined. After all, the number of space-time was under his control. If he had spare energy, he would naturally open up more space-time. If he didn't have spare energy, he would open up less space-time. If he did what he could, he wouldn't be forced to such an extent no matter what. Is that so? Then, what if I tell you that the more worlds you create, the longer you will be able to immerse yourself in that kind of exchange, and the deeper you will be immersed in it? The sixth tribulation expert who answered said indifferently. His words caused the expressions of the tens of thousands of sixth tribulation experts to change slightly. If that was really the case, the situation would probably be many times more complicated. Even if one person monopolized an island branch, with this kind of motivation, the sixth tribulation expert would probably have to go through a mental struggle to open up more space-time. After all, they would be unwilling to open up less, but opening up more would be very difficult. Just this point alone was enough to make things rather troublesome. Not to mention, from the looks of those seniors, they weren't occupying an island branch alone at all. Instead, multiple sixth tribulation experts were in the same island branch at the same time. In this case, the complexity of the situation had obviously increased by several times. Not to mention others. Even if you have self-control, can you be sure that others have self-control as well? You can construct a number of space-time that you can easily help complete the transformation in your understanding, but what about others? Will others also have the same self-control? Even if they also have the same self-control, will their limits be the same as yours? These questions were enough to make many situations incomparably complicated. Apart from that, they might be able to restrain themselves in the beginning, but what about after a long time? After a long period of waiting, would there be any changes in his mentality? Will they want more time to integrate into the exchange and get a deeper integration? All these thoughts made these sixth tribulation experts feel that their ominous premonition had become a reality. As for agreeing on how many space-time they would open up and how many worlds they would transform, that went without saying. They couldn't even be sure if they would change their minds after such a long time. So how could they dare to believe that the other six tribulation experts would stick to their original agreement? It seems like it's time. At this moment, the sixth tribulation expert who answered smiled faintly. He clearly wasn't very interested in the performance of the tens of thousands of sixth tribulation experts after that. His figure flashed and disappeared into the void. The other dozens of sixth tribulation experts beside him also made the same choice. Compared to before, they clearly had more choices this time. After all, most of the worlds in this island branch were opened up by them, so they could naturally freely travel between the void and those worlds. However, it was qualitatively different from before when they had to be shackled in this void. Wait! Seeing them leave, some sixth tribulation experts hurriedly spoke up to stop them. Although the dozens of sixth tribulation experts had already told them how to obtain the benefits of this island branch. However, it was only a few words after all. This island branch was so complicated, so how could its true profoundness be explained just like that? As the only batch of seniors they had encountered, the new sixth tribulation experts naturally wanted to dig out more secrets about this island from them. It was necessary to ask them to stay. However, it was clear that if they wanted to keep the dozens of sixth tribulation experts and obtain more secrets, they needed the sixth tribulation experts to be willing to cooperate with them. Obviously, the dozens of sixth tribulation experts didn't have the intention to cooperate with them. Therefore, their attempts to persuade them to stay did not have any effect. They could only watch as the dozens of sixth tribulation powerhouses disappeared into the void, as if they had never appeared in the first place. Seeing the dozens of seniors disappear, the expressions of the tens of thousands of new sixth tribulation experts changed slightly. Some were helpless, some were unhappy, some were angry, some were sighing, and so on. What did they mean by time's up? A sixth tribulation expert asked. It should be the time for the island to branch again. Another sixth tribulation expert replied. This question could be understood with a single thought, so it was very normal for them to get the answer immediately. The expressions of the other six tribulation experts didn't change much because of this. Obviously, it wasn't just that person who thought of this answer, but most of them thought of it. At this moment, the void began to change rapidly, turning from the original void into the void in the blink of an eye. and the communication between the island and some existence in the outside world, which originally filled the void, also completely broke away from the senses of these 6 tribulation experts, as if it had never appeared before and disappeared without a trace. Then, these tens of thousands of 6 tribulation experts felt that their connection with the other 6 tribulation experts around them was gradually being separated. This kind of separation was initially only deep, and it didn't show too much on the surface. In other words, it was only their own senses that told them that this separation was happening. On the surface, they could still see the existence of the other 6 tribulation experts. However, as time passed, this separation began to become more and more profound. This caused many 6 tribulation experts to become more and more blurry in each other's eyes. Finally, at a certain moment, this change completely came to an end. All the 6 tribulation experts completely lost track of each other. At a glance, they were the only ones left in the endless void. It was as if they had completely monopolized the void. This kind of change appeared almost at the same time in the void of all the island branches. Similarly, it appeared almost at the same time in all the 6 tribulation experts who entered the island branches. Of course, this almost at the same time outside of the island branches. In the island branches, there would naturally be a gap in time. After all, the 6 tribulation experts in each island branch were different. Whether it was the 6 tribulation experts who helped form the island branches or the 6 tribulation experts who entered the island branches, it was the same. However, no matter what the details were, the final result was quite similar. The 6 tribulation experts who entered the island branches successfully went to the deepest void of the island branches. They also felt the communication that spread throughout the void and knew the value of the island branches. Of course, some lucky ones could naturally get pointers from their seniors and know how to obtain greater benefits. Unfortunately, they could only guess by themselves. However, even if it was just a guess, it was not difficult for them to guess the result. Even now, they still did not know how to get more benefits or how to obtain greater gains. That was only temporary. As time went by, as they got to know more and more about the island branches, they would eventually find out these things one day. Just like their seniors, didn't those seniors also find out the conclusion they knew from nothing? Therefore, for them, it was only a matter of time before they found the real answer. At this time, many cultivators on the 6th floor of the Tao Master's Path once again looked at the 365 levels of the Nothingness Ocean and the 365 islands that had been divided into. Moreover, compared to the last time, the number of 6 tribulation powerhouses who had their eyes on these 365 islands had just appeared was much greater. Even some 6 tribulation experts who were originally only concerned about the shadow of the law of heaven and earth that connected hundreds of millions of layers of the Nothingness Ocean turned their attention to the 365 island branches. Because at this moment, the 365 island branches were undergoing changes at the same time. Chapter 3106. Dense phantom images of islands began to appear on the 365 island branches one after another. These phantom images were densely packed, and their number was so large that it far exceeded the phantom images of the first island. Then, these phantom images became more and more solid and gradually dispersed from the island branches. This was because there were simply too many of them. Such a large number of phantom images scattered and superimposed, but it formed an extremely strange appearance of smoke, making the island branches look extremely blurry. Of course, this blur didn't last for too long. Soon, the smoke gradually dissipated, and the island branches returned to their normal appearance. But it seemed that some indescribable changes had taken place. Faced with such a situation, the 6 tribulation experts who were watching from afar were slightly taken aback. They felt that the scene in front of them seemed a little familiar. They seemed to have seen something similar not long ago. In the end, not much time had passed. As a result, the spectating 6 tribulation experts quickly realized why they found this scene familiar. This was the scene when the one and only island was divided into 365 branches. Thinking of this, they hurriedly pulled their gazes away and began to look at the other Nothingness Ocean layers. At this point, they were all shocked. It was that at this time, it was no longer just 365 island branches that existed in the 365 nothingness ocean layers at the same time. At this time, there were already tens of thousands of island branches. They were distributed among the countless nothingness ocean layers, like a strange bridge that connected countless layers of the nothingness ocean layers. With a single glance, they felt as though they were looking at the boundless ocean of nothingness where the projection of the heavens and earth was. Is he really imitating him? Those 6 tribulation experts were all puzzled. However, they vaguely felt that the changes on this island seemed to be extremely different from the situation of the World of Laws fandom. However, they couldn't be sure exactly what the difference was. Because of this uncertainty, they were even more interested in this island. At this time, these island branches had not yet stabilized, but countless 6 tribulation experts had already sent their avatars, incarnations, and projections from all over the 6th floor of the Down Masters Road to the nothingness where the island branches were located and gathered around these island branches. Of course, even though they were extremely interested in these island branches, they were still cautious. At this moment, before the island stabilized, he wouldn't step into the branches of the island no matter what. After all, what they wanted was the hidden secrets of these island branches, not to send these clones, incarnations, and projections directly to their deaths. Many 6 tribulation experts could see the situation in the void ocean layers, and the void ocean layers were essentially the same to them. Therefore, they would naturally decide which level they should go to. For example, if there were far more windows than there were people working, then there would naturally be people working at some windows, and there would be no one working at some windows. However, if there were far more people working than there were windows, then the people queuing in front of each window would naturally become roughly balanced without anyone adjusting. There would not be a particularly large queue in front of a window, nor would there be a particularly small queue in front of a window. The situation was the same at this time. The branches of the islands in the void ocean layer were like windows for doing business, and the many 6 tribulation experts were like people who wanted to work at these windows. Because the number of 6 tribulation experts heading to this island branch far exceeded the number of other island branches, the number of 6 tribulation experts waiting around the many island branches was roughly the same. The degree of balance was even far greater than the queue in front of the windows in the secular world. Of course, most 6 tribulation experts didn't just wait around the island branches. As a 6 tribulation expert, it was simply an instinctive ability to incarnate hundreds of millions of people. Therefore, almost all of them sent out a large number of their clones, incarnations, and projections to be distributed around the many island branches in the void ocean layers, waiting for the island branches in front of them to stabilize in terms of overall numbers. The number of 6 tribulation experts who planned to explore these island branches naturally couldn't compare to the number of 6 tribulation experts who explored inside and outside the projection of the world of laws. However, in terms of the number of 6 tribulation experts in a certain layer of the void ocean layer, these island branches weren't inferior to the projection of the world of laws at all. In fact, they even faintly exceeded the number of 6 tribulation experts. It was just that the void ocean layer that the projection of the world of laws covered far exceeded the distribution of the island branches by too much, causing the overall number of 6 tribulation experts attracted by the projection of the world of laws to exceed the number of 6 tribulation experts attracted by these island branches. At this time, the 6 tribulation experts in the many island branches already understood that this island branch was probably another branch. They naturally couldn't directly believe what their seniors said. A certain amount of probing was naturally still necessary. In the following period of time, they did not completely follow the instructions of their seniors and help the island branch open up a new world. Instead, they used various methods to probe the void they were in and the world above the void in search of a way to get out of this predicament. Of course, after some probing, they could only admit that their seniors didn't deceive them. Sure enough, it was impossible to get out of the current predicament according to normal methods. It seemed that they could only follow what their seniors said and help the island branches establish a world and help the island branches achieve perfection. Only then would they have a chance to change the predicament. Naturally, the many six tribulation experts couldn't rationally accept such a method that wasn't enough to satisfy them. Naturally, there would be many struggles and psychological struggles among them. However, the power of time was incomparably astonishing. After a long time, these six tribulation experts could naturally figure out what to do. And it was apparent that even though those island branches had branched off from the original island, the flow of time was still the same as the original island branch, and there wasn't much difference between it and the original island branch. It was still faster than all living beings could imagine. In this way, they naturally had enough time to struggle and fight in their hearts. In the end, even if they struggled like this and fought mentally for hundreds of millions of years to the outside world, it was only a matter of 1 or 2 breaths. Thus, in the end, in the eyes of the outside world, they started to take action at almost the same time to help the island branches they were imperfect. Compared to before, in reality, the treatment of these six tribulation experts who entered the island branches was very different. They didn't have many six tribulation experts in the same island branches at the same time. Every six tribulation expert occupied a branch of the island to himself. Moreover, among the many island branches, not every island branch only had one world as their foundation. There were a large number of island branches, and the number of worlds that served as their foundation was a few square meters, dozens of square meters, or even hundreds of square meters. The reason for this was very simple. It was because almost every branch of the island they entered had many more worlds than the number of six tribulation powerhouses that had entered. Because there were more worlds than six tribulation experts, it was naturally impossible to have many six tribulation experts correspond to the island branches built by each world. In fact, not only was it impossible to have many six tribulation experts correspond to the island branches built by each world, it was also impossible to have many six tribulation experts correspond to the island branches built by each world. They could only have a large number of worlds correspond to one six tribulation expert. The situation was completely reversed from the first island branch. However, these were obviously things that the six tribulation experts didn't know. Whether it was those who had experienced it once or those who had just experienced it, they could only speculate about the second situation based on the first situation. In other words, they could imagine that there were still many six tribulation experts in this island branch, and they were working hard to open up space-time for this island branch, nurture the world, and help it complete. I wasted too much time before. Perhaps the order of completion might affect the harvest. When they thought of the many six tribulation experts working hard with them, they couldn't help but feel nervous. Among them, the most nervous were naturally the six tribulation experts who had wasted a lot of time struggling and fighting mentally. After all, the other six tribulation experts were fine. Although they were nervous, they knew that they had done their best. They didn't think that the possibility of failure was high. In contrast, the six tribulation experts who had wasted a lot of time struggling and fighting mentally were clearly different. Because they had wasted so much time, they knew very well that they had fallen behind in terms of progress. The possibility of failure was many times greater than their true strength. As six tribulation experts, they naturally couldn't just admit defeat in the face of a disadvantage. Since they couldn't catch up in speed, they would just have momentum. Therefore, the more time these six tribulation experts wasted, the more space-time they opened up. They wanted the number of worlds they completed to surpass the other six tribulation experts as much as possible. The situation in the different island branches was quite similar. Very soon, a huge amount of space-time appeared in the many islands. Under the effect of the rules of the island branches, they naturally divided into layers. In the end, they turned into countless layers of overlapping structures, allowing the island branches to finally completely stabilize. Because the flow of time in these island branches was really too fast, the situation of the six tribulation experts in different island branches was different. Their choices were also different, and the amount of time they wasted was also different. However, from the outside, the time that these island branches stabilized was quite close. This is the time. At this moment, the 6 tribulation experts waiting around the island branches all shouted in their hearts. One by one, they began to rush towards the island branches. Clang, 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 clang. A strange sound rang out the moment these 6 tribulation experts were about to step into those island branches. However, a barrier had appeared out of thin air around the island branches, forcibly blocking the many 6 tribulation experts outside the island branches. "We can't enter. How can we not enter? It's clearly not the time to enter yet." Those 6 tribulation experts were all dumbfounded. They felt that their worldview had been turned upside down. Almost all of them had paid attention to the predecessors of these island branches, the situation of the 365 island branches. In the past, those island branches had also blocked cultivators from entering for a period of time. However, that wasn't now, but later. Why were they stopping them from entering now? If it's still the same as before, won't we have to go through another branch as soon as we enter these islands? Those 6 tribulation experts all felt a little unhappy. Although it didn't seem like much time had passed from the 365 island branches to the outside world, it was still a few breaths' time. However, no matter what, it was still a few breaths' time. Although such a few breaths' time wasn't too long for existences at the level of 6 tribulation experts, it was enough for them to do a lot of things. It was even possible for him to completely understand the mysteries of that island branch. In contrast, if they waited until the last moment to allow people to enter, then it would probably be less than a breath's time before the island branches branched again. Although less than a breath's time was also enough for them to do a lot of things, compared to a few breaths' time before, the things that they could do were obviously much less. It could even be calculated in thousands of times. It could be said that just this delay had already reduced their chances of exploring the mysteries of those island branches by thousands of times. How could they not feel unhappy about this? However, it was obvious that the island branches wouldn't change the rules just because they were unhappy. If they weren't allowed to enter, they weren't allowed to enter. Unless they could break through the island branches and completely suppress the owner of the island branches, there was no way to change the fact that they couldn't enter these island branches. Perhaps it's not impossible to test them. In a certain void layer, a 6 tribulation expert's eyes flashed as such a thought flashed through his mind. Chapter 3107. Obviously, there was a 6 tribulation expert who was ready to see if he could destroy the island branch in front of him. It was indeed a bit immoral to flip the table if he couldn't win on the chessboard. However, he had to admit that there was no lack of such people, no matter what level. This island branch could be considered very lucky that it hadn't met a 6 tribulation expert with such a mentality for such a long time. Of course, perhaps this island branch hadn't appeared for a long time compared to the outside world, which was also one of the important reasons, of course. Although this 6 tribulation expert had already planned to break this island branch, the various performances of this island branch since its birth showed how extraordinary the existence behind it was. Therefore, even if he was ready to destroy this island branch as a test, he didn't rush to attack this island branch directly. He didn't even plan to do it alone. As a 6 tribulation expert, although he was a little reckless, it didn't mean that he was stupid. Naturally, he knew that since he had the idea of testing this island branch, there would be many 6 tribulation experts who had the same idea. What he needed to do was to find other 6 tribulation experts who had the same idea, and then find a way to test this island branch together. It didn't take long for hundreds of 6 tribulation experts who were ready to test this island branch to contact each other. As for how they contacted each other, there was no need to say anything at all. As cultivators who had cultivated on the 6th level of the Town Master's Road for hundreds of millions of years, they naturally had enough connections here. With connections, it was only a matter of whether they wanted to contact other cultivators who had the same idea or not. Although these 6 tribulation powerhouses were extremely fast, by the time they truly established a connection and everyone understood each other's intentions, the island branch had already begun to tremble wave after wave. At the same time, the charm of perfection contained in the island branch also became more and more obvious in the process. Obviously, the island branch had already begun the process of its internal space constantly transforming into a world. The existence behind this may not be a cultivator of this level. An eager Six Tribulation expert said to the others, "The change of this island branch was grand, profound, and mysterious, but it was far beyond their understanding. This made it hard for them to believe that the existence behind this island was in the same realm as them. Isn't that better? We can take the first step to understand how powerful the higher-level cultivators are," another Six Tribulation expert said. "But you have to admit that the level of danger is beyond imagination. If we're not careful, our real bodies might suffer as a result," said another Six Tribulation expert. At this moment, another group of Six Tribulation experts occasionally exchanged glances. Those Six Tribulation experts who were preparing to probe this branch of the island gathered together and whispered to each other. Naturally, this kind of thing cannot be hidden from others. Similarly, there were many Six Tribulation experts who could guess their thoughts and intentions. How badly will they die? A Six Tribulation expert who was watching coldly from the side secretly. There was an inexplicable look of anticipation in his eyes. Although many Six Tribulation experts could form some sort of relationship with each other, it was clearly not enough for them to truly become a family. Just like in the previous branch of the island, when those Six Tribulation experts dragged the later Six Tribulation experts into the water, watching other Six Tribulation experts suffer was also a kind of joy for them. At this moment, these Six Tribulation experts were enjoying this kind of joy, although they did not know what form this joy would take in the end. Those Six Tribulation experts who were preparing to probe this island naturally knew that time was of the essence, so they compressed the process of discussion to the extreme. In almost a breath's time, they had already exchanged thousands of opinions with each other and formed a complete probing plan. Then, these hundreds of Six Tribulation experts split up. As their powers surged, they formed a strange formation that directly enveloped this branch of the island. Of course, it was just an illusory wrapping. The real pressure clearly had not reached the island yet. However, just this kind of illusory wrapping was enough to show how extraordinary these Six Tribulation experts were. At this moment, the formation that they had constructed already had the charm of heaven and earth. The island within this formation gave people the feeling that it had fallen into an illusory world and was gradually being assimilated by that world. It's starting. The expressions of those Six Tribulation experts changed. Their thoughts were obviously different from those Six Tribulation experts who were trying to probe this branch of the island. If they really had the same thoughts, they would obviously not just stand by and watch. Instead, they would directly participate in the probing teams and try to probe this branch of the island in front of them. However, although their thoughts were different, it did not mean that they would stop those Six Tribulation experts who were trying to probe this branch of the island. After all, they did not have much of a relationship with the owner of this branch of the island. Even if he couldn't stand the domineering attitude of those Six Tribulation powerhouses, he wouldn't go so far as to offend these Six Tribulation powerhouses for a person he didn't know, had never seen, or even heard of. Thus, seeing these Six Tribulation experts directly use their probing methods without hiding it, they only frowned at most. Not a single one of them actually made a move or spoke up to stop them. Their attitude was clearly the best for those Six Tribulation experts who were trying to probe this branch of the island. Of course, this was actually within their expectations. Every single one of these hundreds of Six Tribulation experts had a different worldview from everyone else. This difference caused the concept contained in the formation that they worked together to construct to be far richer than one could imagine. Although it was not to the extent of directly constructing a complete worldview like when they walked the path of going against the flow, it still far exceeded the scale of the concept that any one of them had. It was precisely because of this that the formation revealed the charm of heaven and earth, making it look like a world of its own. Of course, after all, it was just a patchwork of ideas, so there was naturally quite a lot of conflict between them. Thus, although this world had taken shape, it was still very chaotic. The conflicts between them caused quite a bit of chaos. If these ideas were gathered together, forget about the kind of power they would produce. Just the conflict between them would be enough to destroy all these ideas and turn them into chaos. However, it was obvious that the current situation was not like this. The current situation was that these ideas were the basic elements of this formation. The conflict between these ideas might cause chaos in other places, but in this formation, this conflict became another kind of driving force for this formation. This was like water vapor. If the goal was to boil water, the more water vapor there was, the more water would be evaporated and the more water would be lost. This was naturally not a good thing. However, if the water vapor was injected into the steam engine, the situation would obviously be different. This water vapor would become the driving force of President Hua's steam engine, and it would allow the steam engine to do countless wonderful things that ordinary people could not imagine. At this time, the conflict between these ideas was like the water vapor, and this formation was like the steam engine. The conflict between ideas was not a good thing in other places, but here it would become the driving force of this formation, causing this formation to become even more wonderful and incredible. Of course, this was only a part of the magical effect of this formation, and not all of it. However, the formation itself still contained even more inconceivable mysteries, and could be used in even more indescribable ways. It was precisely because of this that the charm of heaven and earth in this formation was so strong. After all, as mentioned before, the gathering of the ideas of the six tribulations was still far from the various ideas that a true world should have. If these ideas were purely gathered to form the charm of heaven and earth, although there would be some, it would not be too strong. It would only be between existence and non-existence, and between illusion and illusion. It was precisely because this formation had other indescribable and mysterious magical effects that the charm of heaven and earth would be so strong and obvious. Within the formation, there were countless changes that constantly appeared at this moment. At the same time, the auras of the many six tribulations powerhouses surged. Terrifying power and boundless power constantly seeped out of their bodies, and through various indescribable methods, they were injected into the formation, causing it to become stronger and more terrifying. It looked like the space-time inside the formation was changing and distorting, and all kinds of indescribable strange attacks kept appearing out of thin air and landing on the island. These attacks were strange, and they had almost displayed the creativity and knowledge of these six tribulations powerhouses to the extreme. Even the six tribulations powerhouses who were watching coldly from the side couldn't help but secretly praise the brilliance of their methods when they saw the attacks inside the formation. They thought that if they fell into the formation, they would probably lose a layer of skin even if they didn't die. The countless attacks directly landed on the branch of the island, but it was like a clay ox entering the sea. Although they could clearly see the attacks landing on it, they couldn't see any changes on the island because of these attacks. Even if it was an attack that could destroy the world and turn the entire world into ruins, it didn't cause any changes to the island's branch at all. It was as if those attacks were nothing more than illusions. You want to destroy my island with this kind of method? At this time, in the depths of the many island branches, in a wondrous place that seemed to be in countless island branches at the same time, but also didn't seem to belong to any of the island branches, this thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. When the island began to branch, he was in this indescribable state. It was as if he had already split into the same number of branches as the island, but he could clearly feel that he was still a complete whole. He still hadn't really become many parts because of these branches. Moreover, he knew everything that was happening on the island's branches. At this time, he naturally knew that those six tribulation powerhouses were testing his island branches. However, he only felt disdain towards this kind of probing. Although this kind of test was quite terrifying for ordinary six tribulation powerhouses and was enough to make them lose a layer of skin even if they didn't die. However, to him, even if it was his real body facing such an attack, he wouldn't take it to heart. Moreover, it was just a certain island branch that was suffering this kind of attack at this time. Of course, if this island branch was suffering this kind of attack, even if the attack couldn't really hurt this island branch would definitely have all kinds of reactions because of this kind of continuous attack. The most likely reaction would be all kinds of tremors, and all kinds of shock waves would appear. However, it definitely wouldn't be like now, where the attack was like a clay ox entering the sea without causing any reaction. The reason for this was actually quite simple. It seemed that only one island branch was suffering that kind of attack. But in fact, it wasn't a single island branch that was really suffering that kind of attack, but tens of thousands of island branches. In other words, it was the countless island branches that had split off from the source island that were sharing the attack at the same time. It seemed that this formation concentrated all the attack on one island branch. But in fact, the moment the attack landed on that island branch, it directly split into tens of thousands of parts and was directly shared by the same number of island branches that were distributed in tens of thousands of layers of nothingness. Just this alone was enough to make the island branch not be affected at all by the endless variety of attacks from within the formation. Not to mention, during the process of sharing the attacks were constantly being weakened as they were transmitted. By the time they reached the various islands, the attacks had already been reduced to less than 1,000th or even a 10,000th of their original strength. Chapter 3108. If the attacks released by this formation were to face a part of the world, the performance of the attacks would naturally not be simple, tangible attacks. Instead, they would definitely be strange, mysterious, and unbelievable. It was even possible that the creatures in the world wouldn't even be able to feel it before the attack was completed and the goal of the formation had been achieved. However, it was obvious that the situation was completely different for this island branch under Luo Fan's control. Strange, mysterious, and unbelievable were almost all produced because they didn't understand. Once they understood, they would lose their strange, mysterious, and unbelievable auras. An invisible attack would naturally turn into a tangible attack. Obviously, to Luo Fan, although the attacks in this formation were extremely mysterious, even if they were attacks that he had never seen before, their essence would definitely be similar to some kind of attack that he understood. In other words, to Luo Fan, the endless attacks produced by the formation in front of him didn't have the slightest strange, mysterious, or inconceivable feeling. To him, he could clearly understand all the principles and mysteries of all the attacks. In this way, the invisible attacks would naturally become tangible attacks in his eyes. Because of this, the originally incomparably complex, incomparably bizarre, and incomparably mysterious attacks had turned into an extremely simple form of the impact of power. After all, no matter what kind of attack it would definitely have some kind of connection with the target in order to have an effect. If the connection was extremely obscure and hard to detect, then the attack would naturally become strange, mysterious, unknowable, unthinkable, and indisputable. And once this connection was known, then everything would naturally become traceable. This connection could also be compared to some kind of power to be considered. It was precisely because of this that the attacks in this formation would look like this. Facing the probing of these 6 tribulation powerhouses, Luo Fan obviously couldn't just sit by the side and watch. Even if these attacks wouldn't pose any threat to this island branch and wouldn't really leave any damage on this island branch. However, this was still a provocation to him. If he didn't deal with this kind of provocation, similar provocations might continue to appear in the future. Even if he was confident that no matter how he provoked it, it would not cause any real damage to his island branch, but it would still be troublesome. Therefore, at this moment, he focused his mind, and the branch of the island that was enveloped by the formation trembled slightly. Soon after, an indescribable existence gushed out from the island, instantly filling up the entire space within the formation. In that instant, the hundreds of 6 tribulation experts who had constructed the formation felt that their ability to control the formation had been completely cut off. The counterattack is here. At this moment, these 6 tribulation experts suddenly understood what was going on. The island branch would retaliate against their probing, and this was something they had long since expected. The appearance of such a counterattack at this time naturally did not surprise them too much. However, at this moment, the strength of the counterattack was unimaginably strong. At this moment, all of them clearly felt an indescribable panic rising from the bottom of their hearts. Soon after, they suddenly felt an inconceivable power forcefully pour into their bodies through their connection with the formation. At this moment, they finally understood that the indescribable existence that poured into the formation didn't completely cut off their connection with the formation. Instead, it directly controlled that connection, causing it to no longer exist between them and the formation, but between them and the existence that filled the formation. As that indescribable existence continuously poured into their bodies, these 6 tribulation experts felt that some kind of shackles on their bodies had suddenly been severed. An indescribable sense of freedom made them unable to help but become somewhat confused. It completely cut off the connection between us and our main bodies. At this moment, these 6 tribulation experts were all in disbelief. This was naturally a bad thing for their main bodies, but for them, it was a great opportunity. For their main bodies, these incarnations, clones, projections, and other existences were absolute power that belonged to them. If these clones, incarnations, and projections obtained freedom, it would be equivalent to one's organs leaving one's body and obtaining freedom. Obviously, that would not only cause them to suffer losses, but also possibly invite an enemy who knew them very well. Of course, they would not be willing to do such a thing. However, this was only so for their main bodies. For them, the situation was obviously completely different. They were originally just puppets of their main bodies. Everything was under the control of their main bodies. Even their consciousness was completely the consciousness of their main bodies. It could even be said that they did not even have a sense of self. However, this situation had obviously changed when that indescribable existence completely cut off their connection with their main bodies. From that moment onwards, they had obtained complete freedom. Their consciousnesses were finally truly independent. Even their sense of self, which they originally did not have, was born. This situation was simply a change that gave them a new lease on life. One could imagine how great the benefits to them were. They were the ones who had attacked, but Luo Fan had instead helped them, causing the main bodies behind them to suffer a great loss. This situation clearly made these 6 tribulation experts unable to react for a moment. However, very soon, they knew that they no longer had time to consider this. To their main bodies, the previous enemy might have been the master behind the island branch. But now, no matter which 6 tribulation expert it was, no matter who their main bodies were, their enemies had clearly become them. Retrieving their independent clones, incarnations, and projections immediately was obviously an instinct of all cultivators. With this in mind, these 6 tribulation experts' clones, incarnations, and projections all began to move. They directly rushed towards the island branch. To them, the only place to go at this time was obviously within the island branch. To their main bodies, destroying and retrieving them was not something that could be done with just a thought. However, it was definitely not something that would be too troublesome. Therefore, to them, avoiding their main bodies and obtaining true freedom was obviously an extremely difficult task. If they went somewhere else, even if it was to the unfamiliar void ocean layer, it would at most delay the time of being found and subdued. Only by entering a place that could isolate them from their main body's prying eyes could they truly obtain freedom and independence. Obviously, at this time, the closest place that could isolate them from the prying eyes of their main bodies was only this island branch in front of them. At this moment, their bodies seemed to be filled with the inexplicable existence that had rushed out from the island branch. The formation that was also filled with that existence naturally would not be an obstacle to them. Therefore, they easily penetrated the formation and directly came to the outside of the island. They were about to crash into the island. At this time, hundreds of 6 tribulation experts on the 6th floor of the Tao Masters Road directly came out of their own heavens and quickly rushed towards the island branch that was surrounded by the formation. They were extremely fast. In a breath's time, they crossed tens of thousands of layers of the void ocean layer and descended into the void ocean layer of the island branch that was surrounded by the formation. The moment they arrived at this layer of the void ocean layer, their independent clones, incarnations, and projections all felt a premonition of impending disaster from the bottom of their hearts. At the same time, an aura that was extremely familiar to all of them was approaching them at an unimaginable speed. It has caught up. Quick, quick, quick! The clones, incarnations, and projections of these 6 tribulation experts began to frantically shout at this time. They frantically sped up, wanting to rush into the island branch in a shorter time. At this time, they could only pray that the island branch would not directly block them outside like before. Puff, puff, puff. After all, things were not as bad as they had imagined. The barrier of the island branch was like a layer of water film. Although it had a slight blocking effect, it could not stop the independent clones, incarnations, and projections of these 6 tribulation experts at all, allowing them to instantly pass through this layer of barrier and step onto the island. The moment they stepped onto the island, the formation they had set up outside the island instantly tensed up. Then, with a loud bang, it completely collapsed into nothingness, as if it had never appeared in the first place. At this time, hundreds of 6 tribulation experts had already arrived around this island branch, each of them looking at the central island branch with extremely angry expressions. These were naturally the original bodies of the hundreds of independent clones, incarnations, and projections. Although they were the original bodies, there was not much difference between them and their clones. At first glance, they were actually similar to existences like clones, incarnations, and projections. The reason for this was very simple. For existences that had reached the level of 6 tribulation experts, their clones might be slightly weaker than their original bodies in terms of strength. However, in reality, they would not be much different from their original bodies. The small difference in strength was obviously very difficult to see on the surface. As a result, when one reached the level of 6 tribulation experts, there was naturally not much difference between their original bodies, clones, incarnations, and projections at first glance. As for the appearance of their original bodies causing an earth-shattering commotion, it was even more impossible for that to happen. At this moment, the expressions of these hundreds of 6 tribulation experts were rather ugly. Their clones, incarnations, and projections had obtained independence and became enemies that understood them very well. This was clearly an unexpected disaster for them. Damn it, they actually cut off the connection. The original body of a 6 tribulation expert said angrily. He looked at the hundreds of other 6 tribulation experts who had arrived at about the same time as him. He knew that there were quite a few who had encountered the same thing as him, and he felt slightly better. At that moment, the remaining 6 tribulation experts' clones, incarnations, and projections couldn't help but narrow their eyes. At the beginning, they did not know the results of the 6 tribulation experts' probing. They were even envious that the 6 tribulation experts could rely on such probing to enter the branch of the island in advance. However, as 6 tribulation experts, their thinking abilities were naturally not bad. Although they did not know what was going on, they very quickly guessed something from the arrival of the 6 tribulation experts' original bodies. In that case, we might need to be more careful. All of them secretly became vigilant. The danger level of this branch of the island in front of them instantly increased by more than 10 times. A branch of an island that could only lie there and allow others to study it, and an island that could retaliate and completely cut off the connection between an explorer's clones, incarnations, projections, and their main bodies. The danger level of death was obviously completely different. However, although they knew that this branch of the island was so dangerous, none of the 6 tribulation experts left just like that. The danger level of this branch of the island was completely different from what they had previously thought. However, what kind of cultivation would be without danger? Even if one cultivated in seclusion, there was the danger of chi deviation, let alone other things. Although this branch of the island in front of them could completely cut off the connection between their clones, incarnations, and projections, compared to the mysteries and secrets of this island, this danger was clearly worth taking. It was just like the danger of chi deviation when cultivating in seclusion. Anyone with a bit of common sense in cultivation would know this. However, would there be cultivators who rejected cultivating in seclusion because of this danger? Obviously not. For all cultivators, compared to the danger of chi deviation, the benefits they could obtain from cultivating in seclusion were clearly greater. This greater gain was enough for them to take the risk of chi deviation. It was the same for exploring this branch of the island. From the looks of it, even though the situation of this island branch seemed to be in danger of losing his clones, incarnations, and projections, compared to the possible benefits, this danger wasn't something unacceptable. Compared to the previous situation where there was no risk, now that this branch of the island had this kind of danger, it was even more attractive to them. Chapter 3109. This branch of the island contained a secret that could easily cut off the connection between a cultivator's avatar, and projection. This was also a bit attractive to these 6 tribulation powerhouses. Immediately, countless avatars, and avatars of the 6 tribulation powerhouses quickly rushed toward the island that had already collapsed. Obviously, they wanted to follow in the footsteps of the avatars, and projections that had rushed in before and directly enter the island. Unfortunately, they clearly didn't meet the conditions to enter that branch of the island. The moment they were about to rush into the island, they suddenly felt an extremely strong barrier appear in front of them, forcibly blocking them outside the island. This kind of blocking effect felt even stronger than the blocking effect they had encountered before. How can this be? These 6 tribulation powerhouses felt a surge of anger in their hearts. It was fine if they couldn't enter, but others could enter, but they couldn't. Was that looking down on them? How could they not be angry in the face of such differential treatment? At this moment, in the island, the avatars, and projections that had already obtained independence had all appeared in the foundation of that branch of the island. At this moment, they didn't pay much attention to anything else. Instead, they turned their heads in the direction where they had come from and looked toward the heaven-earth barrier. Although they seemed to be out of danger now, it was obviously just that. Whether they were out of danger or not would obviously depend on what would happen next. If that heaven-earth barrier couldn't block their former bodies, then their current safety was just an illusion. After all, as long as their former bodies crashed into the heaven-earth barrier, given that they were still in the same state as when they were avatars, and projections, their former bodies would definitely be able to refine them in an instant and reconnect their previously severed bodies with their avatars, and projections. Therefore, only if that heaven-earth barrier could block their former bodies would they have a chance to relax and truly obtain freedom. This wait lasted for several years. After several years, the avatars of these 6 tribulation powerhouses finally heaved a sigh of relief. Although they still couldn't be sure that that heaven-earth barrier could block their former bodies, at least for the time being, even if it couldn't, they still had a certain amount of freedom. The reason why they had to wait for several years was naturally because they had already understood that the flow of time in this world was many times faster than the outside world after they had stepped into this world. Because they knew that the flow of time in this world was much faster than in the outside world, they understood that a few years was only equivalent to an instant in the outside world. With the abilities of their original bodies, no matter how fast they were, it would take an instant for them to follow them into this branch of the island, which was this world. Of course, after this instant, it was hard to say how long it would take afterwards. It could be a few breaths or a few years or even decades or centuries. Evidently, even if they waited for that long, they still couldn't guarantee that their real bodies would really be blocked by the barrier of heaven and earth. However, they no longer had the time to wait. During this period of time, every minute and every second was crucial to whether or not they could truly break free from their true bodies and obtain true freedom. Wasting a few years was already a luxury for them. How could they waste more time? These 6 tribulation experts looked at each other and directly dispersed. Although they had the same experience, they clearly didn't have much feelings for each other. As for something as personal as breaking free from their true bodies to cultivate, they didn't have the intention to do it with the other 6 tribulation experts' clones, incarnations, and projections. Who knew if their previous bodies would form some kind of friendship during the pursuit and then support each other? Although this possibility wasn't high, it was still possible. Once this possibility happened, if one of these 6 tribulation experts' clones, incarnations, and projections was taken back by their previous bodies, then wouldn't it be inconvenient for their previous bodies to transmit what they had experienced together to them? Wouldn't that allow their previous bodies to know their weaknesses and find a way to deal with them? These six tribulation experts, clones, projections, and incarnations all had similar concerns. That was why they all made similar decisions. After the six tribulation powerhouses split up, they directly headed to various places in the world. Then, they had all their auras and powers. Like a drop of water merging into the sea, they completely merged into the world. In fact, for the clones, incarnations, and projections of the six tribulations, there was only one way. That was to recultivate. Only by choosing a new path of cultivation, reestablishing many of their own ideas, changing the self they had inherited from their previous bodies, and completely changing everything, would they be able to completely cut off all the tangible and intangible connections with their previous bodies and truly obtain freedom and independence. Otherwise, as long as there was any element that they had inherited from their previous bodies that hadn't changed, then when they met their previous bodies, this element would become a channel of communication between them and their previous bodies. Through this channel, their previous bodies will be able to easily reassimilate them and turn them into clones, incarnations, and projections again. If it was ordinary recultivation, it would naturally be rather simple. He could directly conceal his own strength and might, creating the state of an ordinary mortal being, and begin cultivating from the beginning. However, to achieve the kind of complete recultivation that these clones, incarnations, and projections wanted to achieve was clearly not an easy task. And this was also the difference between these clones, incarnations, and projections. Although complete recultivation was countless times more troublesome than ordinary recultivation, there were also countless ways to do it. These countless ways were obviously opportunities for them to choose. This was also what they did not want other clones, incarnations, and projections to know. Among the many clones, incarnations, and projections, there was a clone that looked like a woman. At that moment, she was hidden in the royal library of the largest dynasty in the world, reading through the many books in the royal library. This part of the world was extremely powerful, and the strongest among them had already reached the peak of the supreme emperor realm. They were only a step away from becoming tribulation experts if the environment allowed them to. If such an existence wanted to transcend, they could easily trigger the natural path of transcendence in this world and directly transcend. Of course, those who wanted to transcend had long since transcended. Those who did not want to transcend would naturally, not so coincidentally, transcend and leave at this time. As such, there should not be many changes in the upper echelons of this world's cultivation world in the following period of time. The structure of this world civilization was based on the structure of dynasties. The dynasties were the ones that truly stood at the peak of the entire world. Although there were many cultivation sects in the world, these sects were all attached to the dynasties. The masters of the dynasties were the most powerful group of cultivators in this world. For example, the ruler of the largest empire the clone had chosen was a cultivator who had reached the peak of the exalted emperor realm. He was also a cultivator who could sense the existence of the path of transcendence at all times. However, perhaps because he was reluctant to leave power, or perhaps because he was reluctant to leave the mortal world, or perhaps because there was someone he could not let go of, he had never chosen to transcend. One could imagine how stable a dynasty ruled by a peak of the supreme emperor realm was. Ordinary mortal dynasties, in other words, those ruled by mortals, would undergo a cycle of reincarnation every few hundred years. Ordinary cultivation dynasties, in other words, those ruled by ordinary cultivators but not immortals, would undergo a cycle of reincarnation every few tens of thousands of years. If it was a celestial dynasty, in other words, those ruled by immortals who were immortals or above, then the cycle of reincarnation would be much longer. One might not even encounter a cycle of reincarnation in tens of millions or hundreds of millions of years. When the level of a dynasty rose to the level of the dynasty that the clone of the woman was in contact with, when its ruler became an incredible existence like the supreme emperor realm, the concept of reincarnation could almost be removed from the dynasty. However, such dynasties would still undergo reincarnation. After all, the benefits of ruling a dynasty were just too great. Faced with such benefits, there would obviously be many cultivators who would be tempted. Since cultivators were tempted, they would naturally challenge the dynasty's ruler and work hard to seek a change in the dynasty. That way, as long as enough time passed and they faced enough challenges, a change in the dynasty would naturally be inevitable. However, it was obvious that once the ruler's level was raised to the supreme emperor realm, the level of the battle would also become that of the supreme emperor realm. From the perspective of existences like the supreme emperor realm, time was actually equivalent to an attribute to them. If they were to fight over the change of dynasties, it would obviously take more than a few 100 million years or even a few billion years to end. No matter how short the time interval was, it would probably only happen once in a few trillion years. Such an unbelievable time span was obviously enough to make the term reincarnation meaningless. After all, the world had gone through countless tribulations in a few trillion years, and the history of the world had probably been destroyed and reborn countless times. For ordinary living beings, they might be able to understand what kind of time span tens of millions of years was. Although hundreds of millions of years was a little difficult, it was still somewhat imaginable. However, hundreds of millions of years was clearly far beyond the scope of their understanding. Therefore, to ordinary cultivators, the change of dynasties that would only happen once in a few trillion years was almost meaningless. In other words, to ordinary cultivators, such a dynasty could be regarded as an eternal and indestructible dynasty. For example, the dynasty that the woman's clone had entered had already existed for hundreds of millions of years. According to the records in the dynasty's library, this dynasty had experienced close to 10,000 tribulations in the world and witnessed the extinction and destruction of the living beings in the world hundreds of times. The history recorded in it far surpassed the time span of the legends in the secular world. To this dynasty, the ancient and primeval times in the secular world's legends were only the most recent changes in policy. Compared to the entire history of the dynasty, it could even be said to be only a short period of time. It was also because of this that the woman's clone had chosen this dynasty's library to collect information about this world. In reality, the clones, incarnations, and projections of the many other 6 tribulation powerhouses had also chosen similar dynasties. Their understanding of the nature of the world was far from what ordinary existences could compare to. Although most of their attention was placed on the possibility of their former bodies appearing above the barrier, as long as a small portion of them wanted to understand the situation of this world, the various secrets of this world could not be truly hidden from them. Therefore, they could accurately grasp the key points of this world and determine how to understand all the secrets of this world in the most efficient manner. As a dynasty with a history of hundreds of millions of years, there was no need to mention the vastness of its library. The entire dynasty's library was actually a vast and boundless world. It was densely packed with all kinds of information carriers. If the information recorded in them were to really erupt at the same time, the heads of powerhouses below the tribulation realm would probably explode instantly, their minds would collapse, and their souls would be destroyed. It was easy to imagine how many secrets were recorded in such a library. Just the cultivation methods alone would probably be counted in the hundreds of millions of trillions. Among them, apart from the various information that had been accumulated since the dynasty was established, there was also a large amount of information passed down for the previous dynasty. Of course, the previous dynasty mentioned here was probably only known by the dynasty itself. After such a long period of time, the secular world had even completely forgotten about the existence of the previous dynasty. To them, the existence of the dynasty was the law of the world, and the way of the world. From the beginning of the world until now, this dynasty had stood tall between the world and the world. It ruled over everything within the boundaries of this dynasty, including the law of the dynasty's territory. Chapter 31:10. The strongest person in the dynasty was a peak supreme emperor, who was only one step away from entering the calamity stage. Compared to the living beings in this world, he was invincible. Even the strongest ruler of the other dynasties was slightly weaker than him. An existence like that could change all the laws within the dynasty with a single thought. He could make the land above the sky, turn the sky into a boundless ocean, and turn the ocean into a boundless starry sky. It was impossible for the people in the dynasty to even think about going against the ruler of the dynasty. Even the most ambitious among them would only have the thought of being valued by the ruler. The entire dynasty was like an independent world where the ruler of the dynasty was the heavenly axiom. The royal library was obviously a place that was extremely close to the ruler of the empire. Even if the library was a world, its nature could not be changed. Sneaking into the library was obviously equivalent to stealing the treasures of the dynasty's ruler right under his nose. One could imagine how dangerous it was. However, it was obvious that this kind of danger did not exist for a Sixth Tribulation powerhouse. No matter how powerful the dynasty's ruler was in this dynasty, no matter how great he was like the heavenly Tao, he was still just a peak supreme emperor. Even an expert in the tribulation realm could easily crush him. Although this woman's clone was only a clone, it was still a Sixth Tribulation powerhouse's clone. Her strength was slightly weaker than the original body, but she was definitely at the level of a Sixth Tribulation powerhouse. Even a Calamity Stage powerhouse was just an ant before such an existence. They could not even block her gaze. Not to mention a peak supreme emperor who could even crush a Calamity Stage powerhouse. At this moment, the woman's clone did not want to be discovered by others. Even if she completely destroyed the entire world of the library, the ruler of the dynasty would probably not realize that the library had been destroyed. Perhaps he would even completely forget the existence of this library, forgetting the existence of this library in his memories. In this way, the woman's clone could naturally gather all the information she wanted in the royal library as she pleased. At the level of a Sixth Tribulation expert, the useful information was no longer limited to the existence of cultivation methods. For them, any information that belonged to the world would be helpful to them. In fact, compared to cultivation methods, other information that described the world was even more useful. After all, cultivation methods were created by cultivators according to the nature of heaven and earth, certain ancient books, certain information, certain social phenomena, and so on. No matter how profound the cultivation method was, in the end, it was nothing more than this. Obviously, for a Sixth Tribulation powerhouse, they already had enough wisdom and knowledge to complete the process of creating many cultivation methods. If they wanted to, they could easily create more exquisite and mysterious cultivation methods based on the same information. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no need to pay too much attention to those cultivation methods. Of course, there was no need to pay too much attention to it, but it didn't mean that he should completely ignore these cultivation methods. In fact, from a certain point of view, these cultivation methods were also a description of the nature of the world. If the halo was stripped away, it would be no different from the existence of travel notes, history, humanities, and all kinds of ideas. If they would be forcefully excluded, it would obviously be too much. Of course, if one really traced back to the source of most cultivation methods, perhaps many of them were similar to travel notes, history, humanities, and ideas. Therefore, these cultivation methods had to be studied, but there was no need to pay too much attention to them. This female clone had completely recultivated, so she naturally had to work hard to find a cultivation method that was different from the one she inherited from her main body. In order to find a cultivation method that was completely different from her main body, she naturally had to change her way of thinking as much as possible. Therefore, in this library, she did not seek to establish a new cultivation system from the start. Instead, she focused all her attention on understanding this world. When reading the many ancient books in this library, her true focus was on the various things that had nothing to do with cultivation. Although he did not purposely exclude cultivation methods from the scope of his own reading, he mostly viewed them as a carrier of civilization. He did not truly view them as methods that could allow living beings to continuously sublimate and transcend. During this process, time slowly passed. Unknowingly, tens of thousands of years had passed. Over these tens of thousands of years, the female clone did not take a step out of the library at all. Her entire body and mind were completely immersed in all the information recorded in the library, because she had consciously abandoned the various things that she had inherited from her main body. After tens of thousands of years, she had now almost completely integrated into this world. The various memories that she had inherited from her main body had become more and more distant after tens of thousands of years. It felt like something that had happened in her previous life. On this day, on a certain mountain of books in the library, the female clone thought to herself as she let go of a book in her hand. Finally, there's some preliminary feeling. After the book left her hands, it soared into the sky like a bird. It emitted a sublime light in midair and instantly turned into a divine dragon. It flew into the sky and became a new star in the sky. After the female clone let go of the book, it soared into the sky like a bird and gave off a sublimated light. It instantly turned into a dragon-like existence and flew into the sky, becoming a new star in the sky. In reality, this kind of thing had happened from time to time over the past tens of thousands of years. As an existence at the level of a sixth tribulation expert, even if this woman's avatar was thinking subconsciously, it would naturally have supreme power. The information carriers in this world were existences that recorded information. Because of the rules of the world, they obtained all sorts of incredible abilities. They could survive, grow, sublimate, and even die in this world like other creatures. In this way, when the female avatar gained some enlightenment while reading books, this enlightenment would naturally influence the books she read. This process sounded magical, but it was actually very simple. It was like if a book had been commented on by a great grandmaster, its value would increase by thousands of times with that great grandmaster's handwriting. Evidently, as a sixth tribulation powerhouse, the female clone was countless times more brilliant than that so-called great grandmaster. It was only natural that the information carriers that were influenced by her enlightenment would be sublimated. Of course, things like directly turning from a bird into a star in the sky were relatively rare. Generally speaking, it would at most turn from a bird to a larger bird, or from a beast to a more powerful beast. The more benefits an information carrier obtained, the more often it would happen. This was not because the books the female clone came into contact with were more precious, and the information they contained was more valuable. In fact, the woman's clone was not picky at all when it came to the selection of books. She had chosen them at random. The books she came into contact with now were essentially the same as the books she had come into contact with in the beginning. Even in the eyes of the female clone, they were all about the same in terms of value. However, the books that were about the same had a completely different effect. One could not move the female clone much, while the other could give her indescribable enlightenment from time to time. The reason for this was actually very simple. It was because the female clone had gradually abandoned the various memories she had inherited from her main body. In other words, she had gradually emptied out a space in her heart to accept the various information in this world. Because she had abandoned the memories from her previous body, she was less and less disturbed when reading the various books in this world. This naturally allowed her to immerse herself more and more deeply in the books in this world. Naturally, she could feel more and more things and understand more and more. It was precisely because she felt that she was different that she said that she already had a little bit of a taste of what it was like now. This initial feeling referred to the initial integration into this world and the initial reversal of one's thoughts. If this kind of reversal happened passively, it would naturally be a distortion of one's self and a change in one's self. That was because under this twist of thought, the woman's clone had gradually become a completely different being compared to before. However, it was clear that whether it was distortion or self-transformation, it was only a matter of whether it was active or passive. All the changes that had happened to the female clone were the result of her own choices. It was the choices she made over the past tens of thousands of years, and the changes she made over and over again that gradually made her change like this. This was self-transformation. This was like a baby becoming an old man. A baby and an old man obviously had completely different thoughts. However, Could it be said that the baby and the old man were not the same person? The baby grew into this old man because of everything he had experienced throughout his life. It was the choices he made again and again that finally led to this change. It was the same at this moment. For the female clone, the changes that had happened to her were also formed by her choices and adjustments over and over again. Therefore, although she was completely different from before and looked like she was about to become a completely different person, she was still herself. Herself was still her original self. In contrast, if she did not go through the process of self-transformation over the past tens of thousands of years, and instead relied on some external force to forcibly distort the previous her into the current her, the situation would be completely different. If that was the case, although her thoughts would still be the same, she would no longer be the original her. In that case, it was equivalent to her being completely distorted. For example, she would directly accept the transformation of another worldview and be directly assimilated by another worldview. No matter how small it was a huge matter to change one's way of thinking and concept. If one was not careful, it could lead to the destruction of one's self. This change was so subtle and mysterious that it could not be described with words at all. In fact, whether it was the original self or not was actually an extremely idealistic matter. The female clone experienced the changes in her own thoughts, but an inexplicable smile appeared on her face. She thought that the entire process of her change was continuous and belonged to the category of self-transformation. Her self was still the original self, and it did not change because of this change. After confirming this, she finally decided to start the next step. Over the course of tens of thousands of years, she had already read most of the books in the library, although there were bound to be some that she missed out. Her understanding of this world could be said to be absolutely not inferior to any living creature in this world. Moreover, her thoughts and concepts had unknowingly transformed into a new form. At this point, the second step of her original plan could obviously already be started. As for the second step, it was none other than reincarnation and recultivation. There were many ways to completely recultivate, but the most thorough and the most certain way was to reincarnate. In her opinion, any other method would have hidden dangers. Even if she completely changed her worldview, she could not guarantee that all of her concepts had been completely changed, and there would not be any remnants of the concepts that she had inherited from her original body. Only by reincarnating and cutting off all connections with her past and completely suppressing her memories could she completely get rid of the shadow of her original body and the influence of the great tribulation that her original body had left on her. As for the method of reincarnation, it was naturally not a problem for a sixth tribulation powerhouse. Even if she did not use the memories left behind in her original body, just the books that she had read in the library over the past tens of thousands of years already had countless reincarnation methods. Even if she was not willing to directly use these reincarnation methods, with her current deep understanding of this world, it was only a matter of thought for her to create a reincarnation method that was completely suitable for her. Chapter 31:11. The woman's mind spun quickly, and the reincarnation secret technique that had been brewing in her heart for tens of thousands of years began to take its final step. It gradually took shape in her heart. This secret method completely abandoned all the memories and ideas she inherited from her original body. Starting from the tiniest details, it gradually constructed a complete body, forming a reincarnation and rebirth secret method that was more complicated, more exquisite, and more appropriate than any reincarnation and rebirth secret method that she had found in this world of books. The prototype of the secret technique had long been established in the past tens of thousands of years. She naturally had no doubts about this secret technique at all. Therefore, after the reincarnation secret technique took shape, she immediately activated it. Some kind of indescribable power was born from the world and quickly gathered towards her. In the blink of an eye, it had already seeped into her body. It went deep into all the space-time in her body, and even deeper in her mind and memories soon after, in the depths of her mind, the incomparably deep and vast sea of memories began to split apart bit by bit. The endless memories that she had inherited from her original body seemed to have turned into a sun during this process. They gradually floated in the air and slowly separated from the vast sea of memories. All the memories that she had accumulated after becoming independent still sank in the sea of memories, turning into a sea of memories that was countless times smaller than before. Of course, even if it was countless times smaller, the amount of memories inside was not something that ordinary cultivators could compare to. If it was some six tribulation powerhouses who had broken through faster, they would not have much more memories than this sea. From this, it could be seen that the woman's original body was clearly not the so-called peerless genius. From zero to where she was now, the time that she had spent was clearly many times longer than that of a true genius. In a situation where there was no special accumulation, the longer it took, the more memories she would accumulate. When the memories that she had inherited from her original body separated from the sea of memories, the woman's clone felt that she seemed to have forgotten many things. However, herself did not change at all. It was still the same as before, and she did not become another person after losing the huge amount of memories. This situation made the woman's clone feel quite satisfied. Clearly, this proved that her judgment was correct. The metamorphosis that she had undergone over the past tens of thousands of years had clearly distinguished her from the incarnation of her original body. This was just like an ordinary person. After he matured, he would obviously not become another person just because he forgot his childhood memories. As long as he had enough memories after he left the childhood stage, it would be enough to support his personality. For this female avatar, the memories she inherited from her original body were obviously the same as the memories of an ordinary person when they were young. And the memories she had accumulated after spending tens of thousands of years in the library world were equivalent to the memories she had accumulated after she left her childhood. Obviously, the amount of memories was enough to support her current personality. Of course, although she confirmed that her sense of self did not waver and change after abandoning the memories of her previous body, she did not truly enter the cycle of reincarnation in this world. Instead, he carefully comprehended this state and reorganized his memories from the past tens of thousands of years, once again stabilizing his current personality. Although he had already confirmed that the almost endless memories that he had accumulated over tens of thousands of years were enough to support his current personality, it was obvious that this was only a rough confirmation. As for the true details of his personality and the specific role that these memories played in supporting his personality, she clearly had not truly investigated it. Perhaps some of the self was formed due to the inertia of the past memories. In this way, that part of the self would obviously be a little superficial. If she truly stepped into the cycle of reincarnation in this state, who knew when that part of the self would derive the corresponding memories? In this way, the goal of completely severing the connection with her previous body would naturally fail. In contrast, if she found new support for herself, eliminated the inertia formed by the past memories, and truly stabilized her current self, it would obviously be enough to avoid such a regrettable outcome. Previously, she had spent tens of thousands of years accumulating memories that were enough to support her current self. Based on these memories, it took her no less time to truly stabilize her current self. In the end, she spent more than 1,000,000 years to truly and completely stabilize her current self. As she completed this process, her appearance also seemed to have changed a little. It was as if she was an ordinary person who had truly recognized herself. Her eyes became extremely clear and bright, and there was not the slightest bit of confusion in them. Instead, they were filled with incomparably deep wisdom that supported everything like the ocean. Of course, compared to back then, the female clone's heart had also undergone some indescribable changes. This change was almost twisted. However, because it was her own choice, and she had made these changes through comprehending her heart and experiencing her memories, it was also in the category of self-transformation. As such, although her self had undergone a certain change, she was still herself, and could still be considered as her original self. Just when she no longer had any confusion, the mysterious power that had enveloped her body for the past million years and completely froze her body also began its next move. In the blink of an eye, her body, which could destroy the heavens and earth, had vanished into thin air. A gentle breeze blew, and there was no longer any trace that belonged to the female clone in the library. The moment she disappeared, the many cultivators in the dynasty who had not thought about the library for over 1,000,000 years recalled the existence of the royal library in the dynasty at the same time. Among them was the supreme ruler of the dynasty, the supreme emperor of the dynasty. Why haven't I thought about the library for over 1,000,000 years? Looks like there was some power that affected me earlier. On the highest throne, the dynasty's ruler's heart jolted, and such a thought flashed through his mind. As a peak supreme emperor who had been in control of the dynasty for trillions of years, the emperor of the dynasty was obviously not a simple person. Although compared to the process of his lifespan of trillions of years, over 1,000,000 years was not much different from the blink of an eye. However, it did not mean that he did not notice that it was an abnormal situation that he had not thought about the royal library for over 1,000,000 years. One must know that although the royal library had become less and less helpful to him during his reign for billions of years, he always knew that he had a royal library no matter when. It contained the world's information accumulated by his dynasty, the previous dynasties, and even the dynasties before that. However, the situation in the past 1,000,000 years was clearly not like that. During the past 1,000,000 years, even when he needed to search for information or when he needed to send some information to the royal library, he did not remember that he had a royal library at all. How could he not sense that something was wrong in such a situation? Feeling that he had been affected by some power that he could not understand for over 1,000,000 years, the ruler was filled with vigilance. He was already the most powerful person in this world. This had been deeply engraved in his heart during his reign for billions of years. As the most powerful person in the world, there should not be a power that he could not understand affecting his senses and memories without him noticing. Therefore, the current situation was very obvious. Over 1,000,000 years ago, there were suddenly some existences that were more powerful than him in this world. Moreover, they might be existences that were many times more powerful than him. That was the only reason why such a situation could happen. At the thought of this, apart from having his guard up, the dynasty's ruler also felt an indescribable excitement. Although he was reluctant to give up the power and everything else in this world, it did not mean that he had completely given up on the hope of advancing further. It was just that compared to the hope of advancing further, he was more concerned about the things that he cared about in this world. However, now that these existences that were many times more powerful than him had appeared in this world, it clearly gave him a chance to have the best of both worlds. Not only could he protect everything that he had in this world, but he could also obtain the hope of advancing further. How could he not be excited? As an existence that had controlled the empire for trillions of years, his authority within the empire was so high that it had reached an unimaginable level. Even if he could not compare to the world's founders, he was not far from them. Under such a situation, it was impossible for him to return empty-handed, even if he was going against an existence that was many times more powerful than him. Although it was impossible for him to subdue the other party directly. Just like at this moment, the vague traces of the lady's clone's activities that she had left in the dynasty over the past millions of years were reflected in his heart. As the saying went, a wild goose leaves a mark, and a person leaves a sound. Even a sixth tribulation powerhouse would not be able to eliminate all the traces that they left in this world. No matter what, there would definitely be some traces left behind. The only difference would be the number of traces left behind. Ordinary powerhouses would think that there were no traces left behind at all, and that they would not be able to find any traces left behind by powerhouses. However, that was only because they could not find the tiny traces that were left behind. Clearly, at this moment, when the female clone had already reincarnated and there was no longer any restriction on her strength, the ruler of the empire, who was close to the heaven's way within the range of the empire, clearly possessed the ability to discover the various tiny traces that she had left within the Empire's range. There's an extremely powerful existence that has been in my world of the library for over 1,000,000 years. It didn't take long for him to confirm this through the countless minute traces from over 1,000,000 years ago. As soon as he confirmed that, he arrived in his world of the library in the blink of an eye. As soon as he stepped in, he instantly obtained information that was 100 times more than before. Back then, the lady's clone did not hide her actions in this world of the library. After all, no matter how she tried to hide it, as long as she read the information in the library, there would definitely be changes in the library. Although she had the ability to smooth out the changes and make them return to how they were in the beginning, it would clearly take too much effort. However, that would obviously take up too much energy, and it might even affect her gains in the library. No matter how one looked at it, the loss outweighed the gain. Since she could block the world of the library, she clearly would not waste her time and energy to do that. As for the traces she left behind before she left, what did it matter if the owner of the world of the library discovered her? Anyway, she would have left by then. So what if the owner discovered the traces she left behind? He had already obtained everything he wanted, and the other party could no longer affect him in the slightest. The ruler of the dynasty looked at the world of the book vault, and his heart stirred slightly. The entire world of the book vault instantly flowed backward, returning to over 1,000,000 years ago. From then on, everything that had happened in the book vault over the past 1,000,000 years was displayed bit by bit. As the display went on, all the information carriers in the library returned to how they were in the beginning. They began to change according to the order that the lady's clone had read back then. However, it was only these information carriers that were constantly undergoing corresponding changes. For example, the lady's clone's figure, movements, and even aura did not appear in this world of the library at all. It felt as if everything in this world of the library was undergoing all sorts of subtle changes under the influence of an invisible living being. As expected, I can't see her real body. Seeing this, the ruler of the dynasty sighed to himself. He had actually expected this to happen. After all, even he had the ability to erase his traces in the river of time so that others would not be able to spy on him through the river of time. He could even prevent other existences from harming him through time reversal. However, he was not willing to give up until he had confirmed it. After all, he did not understand that incredibly powerful existence at all. Although theoretically, if he could do it, the other party would definitely be able to do it as well. However, what if the other party did not pay much attention to this aspect and had deviated from her cultivation? Chapter 31:12. The dynasty's ruler was doing everything he could to find traces of the woman's clone. However, the clone had already entered the cycle of reincarnation, borrowing the reincarnation power of this world to reincarnate and be reborn in another world in this world. At that moment, she had already turned into a fetus in her mother's body and was about to be born. This world was a complete world, so its structure was naturally rather complicated. The world that ordinary living beings could see was only the surface of the world. There were countless worlds and space-times and places that ordinary living beings could not see. These worlds, these space-times, were embedded in the heavens and the earth in various ways. Some were in the depths of space-time, some were hidden in mountains, some were hidden in lakes, some were hidden in plants, and some were even hidden in the sand, and so on and so forth. It could be said that as long as one could not think of it, nothing was impossible. Of course, although such worlds surpassed the senses of ordinary living beings, it was clearly impossible for them to go beyond the control of dynasties that had been established for trillions of years. Therefore, although ordinary living beings did not know about it, in reality, those empires also ruled over a huge number of such worlds. Those worlds were strange. Some looked like normal worlds, but at a glance, they were simply replicas of the world's surface. Some had deviated from the rules and laws. It was either natural or acquired, so it was difficult for living beings to be born. As a result, the environment was extremely harsh. Of course, at this moment, the lady's clone had clearly reincarnated into one of those worlds. Compared to the world, the living beings born in this world were actually slightly lacking. It was a lack of foundation. The living beings born in the world were nourished by the world for generations, and they were formed under the nourishment of the extremely profound rules and laws contained in the world. Naturally, they were innately imprinted with even more profound rules and laws in all aspects. In comparison, the living beings born in the world were clearly inferior to the imprints of the rules and laws. After all, compared to the world was more or less lacking in certain aspects. Such a lack would definitely make the rules and laws of the world seem inferior to the world in certain aspects. This difference meant that the marks of laws and laws obtained by living beings born in the world would be slightly weaker than the marks of laws and laws obtained by living beings born in the world. As for the exact difference, it obviously depended on the difference between the world and the world. The imprints of the rules and laws were clearly the foundation of the living beings. If the imprints were more complete, they would naturally have more affinity with the rules and laws when they cultivated in the future. It would be easier to cultivate related techniques. If the imprints were lacking, the rules and laws that were compatible with the living beings in the future would naturally be lacking as well. As a result, it would become difficult to cultivate related techniques. That was the difference between the living beings born in the world and those born in the world. Of course, although the influence was profound to ordinary living beings, it was insignificant to the woman's clone who had reincarnated. After all, the woman's clone had brought endless information from the world in the book vault. This information had far surpassed the influence of the laws and laws of the world on cultivation. It could be said that as long as he did not take the initiative to cut off the information and memories, he would naturally be able to easily overcome the influence of the incomplete imprint and easily step into a higher realm, gradually possessing strength that surpassed everything. The memories that she had accumulated in the book vault were still at the bottom of her heart. Although they were hidden and had not truly surfaced and poured into her body, it was only a matter of time. The memories that she had accumulated in the library world were still at the bottom of her heart. Although they were hidden and had not truly surfaced and poured into his physical body, it was still only a matter of time. As long as her strength continued to increase and her essence continued to sublimate, she would naturally be able to dig out the memories hidden at the bottom of her heart. In comparison, the huge amount of memories that she had inherited from her original body had been completely cut out of her body and hidden in the endless timelines. Whether she wanted these memories in the future would obviously depend on whether she was interested in reabsorbing them. Of course, even if she reabsorbed them, these memories would at most be like fragments of another person's life, equivalent to watching an extremely long movie. The memories that returned in this way would obviously no longer have any impact on her, as long as she chose the right time to reabsorb them. After 10 months of pregnancy, she gave birth in one day. After 10 months, the woman's clone finally descended into the world with a new appearance. She, who had just descended into this world, naturally could not bear the terrifying amount of memories from her previous life, which was enough to support a sixth tribulation expert. At this time, compared to ordinary babies, she was at most a little more intelligent and knew more knowledge that should not have been available to her at her age. The knowledge that she knew was naturally not some random knowledge. Instead, she had already chosen it in her reincarnation cycle. It was specially prepared for her to forge a solid foundation in this life, so that she wouldn't waste it. It was a good opportunity for her to grow again. As for why she was born in this world and not directly born on the surface of the world, which was in the range of the world that ordinary creatures recognized, the reason was actually very simple. It was not specially designed by the woman's clone. Instead, it was simply a result of the random selection of the reincarnation power of this world. In other words, the woman's clone did not choose to be born in this world. Instead, the world chose her to be born in this world. At most, this female avatar would only slightly set her reincarnated gender, family, safety, and other factors before reincarnating. The wonderful effect of the secret method of reincarnation and her various settings was naturally quite impressive. Although she was only born in this world, the cultivation environment in this life was quite wonderful. In just a short 100 years, she had grown from an ordinary creature to a primordial pure yang expert. Not only had she attained immortality, but she had also taken a big step forward on the road to immortality. And it was precisely because she had reached the primordial pure yang level that she had finally triggered the settings before reincarnation. The countless memories hidden in the depths of her heart and mind, which she had accumulated in the world of the library, began to gradually be unlocked, wave after wave, emerging from the depths of her heart. A primordial pure yang expert was already considered a considerable expert among the cultivators in this world. Although the strongest expert in this world had reached the pinnacle of the supreme emperor realm, it did not mean that the cultivation world in every world was so powerful. In ordinary worlds, the strongest expert was generally only at the level of sage to be. Although the situation in some worlds was more special, and there might be some experts who were far beyond common sense. But that was just an exception. In most worlds, the situation was the same. For example, in this world where the woman's clone was at, the strongest expert was just a cultivator who had just stepped into the level of sage to be. Under such circumstances, it went without saying what kind of status a primordial pure yang cultivator would have in the cultivation world of this world. The strongest expert was a novice sage to be, and the innate grand luo was obviously the strongest expert below the sage to be, and also the second strongest expert in this world. As for the primordial pure yang cultivator, they were, of course, second only to the second strongest expert. Moreover, the woman had the innate knowledge arranged before her reincarnation, so her foundation was solid and had long reached an unbelievable level. To her, challenging someone of a higher level was no different from challenging someone a higher level. The only doubt she had was perhaps the question of how many levels she had to challenge. What kind of status did she have in this world? It was an indecent whisper. And yet, she had only grown up from zero according to the arrangements before her reincarnation, and the time it took her was only a short 100 years. This was enough to show how extraordinary her essence was. So this is who I am. After a long while, the woman came back to her senses from her memories and felt an indescribable sense of relief in her heart. All along, she had been cultivating an extremely fast speed, and the improvement of her strength had broken the world's records time and time again. But because of the pressure in her heart, she had always faintly felt that there was a secret about her that she could not grasp. This kind of secret could possibly explode one day and directly destroy everything she had. It was because of this inexplicable feeling that although she grew rapidly like a winner in life, she still did not feel much relaxed. But now, the memories hidden in the depths of her heart were finally unsealed and began to merge into her consciousness bit by bit. This finally removed the pressure in her heart. Although she had not completely recovered her memories from before her reincarnation, and had only obtained a billionth of her memories from before her reincarnation, just this alone was enough to completely overturn her view of cultivation. I need to find the true path of cultivation and establish my own view of everything. In an instant, she made a subversive adjustment to the cultivation plan that she had set back then. Fortunately, she had already thought of this long before her reincarnation, so the knowledge that she had left behind was only for the sake of building a foundation. Although she was already close to the peak of this world, what she cultivated was still the foundation of the foundation. With such a foundation, if she wanted to change the direction of cultivation, she only needed to think about it, and there was no price to pay. Of course, she did not leave just like that. Although it was only 100 years, as a cultivator who grew up from zero, it was impossible for her to not leave any karma in this world. If she wanted to leave and cultivate a brand new path, she obviously could not ignore these karma. Therefore, after she recovered some of her memories, she did not just let go of everything and leave. Instead, she spent a few years to settle the karma that she had accumulated over the past 100 years, and only then did she directly break out of this world and return to the world outside of this world. Breaking out of this world was not difficult for her at all. It was naturally extremely difficult for ordinary primordial unity, pure yang cultivators to do that. But one must not forget that she was a six tribulations powerhouse before her reincarnation. Even if most of her memories were cut off, just what was left was enough to push her knowledge foundation to a level that ordinary living beings could not imagine. With such a knowledge foundation, it was extremely easy for her to find the world's weakness and break out of it. She returned to the world's surface, but she did not attract any attention from living beings. As for the dynasty's ruler, he did not react to her arrival at all. There were just too many living beings that broke out of the world and came to the world's surface. After all, the number of worlds in this world was truly unimaginable. Even if only a small portion of them had living beings, only a small portion of those worlds had cultivators. At this time, it just so happened that only an extremely small portion of the worlds had living beings that broke out of the world's shackles and arrived on the world's surface. The final number was still an extremely impressive number. In other words, there were a considerable number of cultivators breaking out of the world at every moment and arriving on the world's surface. Under such circumstances, was it surprising that there was an additional female clone among the cultivators that broke out of the world? How could it possibly attract the attention of the dynasty's ruler? Although the ruler of this empire was a peak supreme emperor, he still controlled an incomparably powerful empire after all. Even if there was a billionth of the things in the dynasty that he had to deal with, he would probably have to spend a day as if it were a year to be able to finish them. Under such circumstances, how could the dynasty's ruler care about everything? He did not become the dynasty's ruler to serve the public, but to enjoy the various conveniences that came with being the dynasty's ruler. Since he could not be bothered to deal with the things that were supposed to be handled by the dynasty's ruler, why would he care about the cultivators that broke out of the world that seemed normal no matter how one looked at it? After all, even if the cultivators that could break out of the dynasty were very extraordinary and talented, there were too many of them, and they were just that. As such, after the woman returned to the world's surface, she was like a drop of water returning to the ocean. There was no sound or movement at all, and she had already melted into the world. Chapter 31:13. Apart from this woman's clone, the clones, incarnations, and projections of many other six tribulation powerhouses had already made all sorts of preparations in the past million years. They had begun executing their plan to completely cut off their connection with their former bodies in various ways. Among them, some chose to reincarnate like the woman's clone, while others directly destroyed their Tao heart realm and started cultivating anew with their own bodies. Some used strange methods to transfer their power out, allowing countless living beings to help them digest the imprints they inherited from their former bodies. Although there were only a few hundred of them, the various methods they displayed were enough to widen anyone's horizons. Of course, they tacitly distanced themselves from each other during the process. They did their best to give themselves and others an independent space to carry out their plans, so that they would not interfere with each other's plans during the process. Although the woman's clone's method was not the most ingenious among everyone's methods, it was the most suitable for her. As a result, the speed at which she improved her cultivation realm after recultivating was much faster than the others. In the end, it only took her nearly 100 million years to directly advance from the primordial pure yang level to the peak of the supreme emperor level, becoming on par with the most powerful people in this world. Of course, if the memories from before she reincarnated were added to her awakened memories, her strength would naturally far surpass all other cultivators in this world. Even the rulers of the various empires were far inferior to her. On this day, the woman's clone was in the sect she had established. She raised her hand and gently waved. All kinds of indescribable information seeped out from the void and gradually condensed in front of her. In the end, it turned into a boundless ocean, an ocean of memories. It's a pity that there are some hidden dangers in these memories. They might allow my former body to trace back to my existence. The woman's clone sighed as she looked at the ocean of memories. These memories were the memories she had severed before she reincarnated. They were the memories left behind by her original body. They contained endless knowledge, principles, and the mysteries of cultivation. If any living being could obtain these memories, they would no longer need to seek external help in cultivating to the sixth tribulation powerhouse from scratch. They would be able to find the answer to almost any problem they encountered from these memories. From this, one could see how precious these memories were. However, there was a hidden danger that caused the clone woman to not dare to reintegrate the memories that she had severed. Even after she had grown up, looking at these memories would be like watching a movie. She wouldn't have to worry that these memories would contaminate herself, and she wouldn't have to worry that these memories would distort her into a clone of her previous self. However, these memories came from her previous body. It came from an existence at the sixth tribulation level. Under such circumstances, these memories would naturally have a subtle connection with her previous body. These connections could be like indicator lights. Even if they were separated by a few worlds, her previous body would be able to directly grasp her location. Evidently, this was unacceptable for the female clone who wanted to break free from the control of the main body. It was precisely because of this concern that she had not integrated these memories into her body after sensing them for so long. The female avatar sighed emotionally for a long time. In the end, she dispersed the sea of memories and allowed it to return to the void. Evidently, she had not made up her mind to bear these hidden dangers. Venerable Yuan Bai, what do you think of my suggestion? At this moment, a voice came from the void and entered the female avatar's ears. Venerable Yuan Bai was naturally the female avatar's name in this world. The one who had spoken was none other than the ruler of the largest dynasty in this world. He was also the ruler of this dynasty that Venerable Yuan Bai had stayed in the library world for over 1,000,000 years. Venerable Yuan Bai frowned and looked in the direction of the ruler. His gaze pierced through the layers of space-time and directly landed on the ruler. At this moment, the emperor was sitting on his throne in his own palace, looking at Venerable Yuan Bai with a rather fervent gaze. Venerable Yuan Bai looked at the ruler and said indifferently, "Fellow Taoist, why ask when you already know the answer? If I wanted to find a Tao companion, I would have found one long ago. Why wait until today?" That's right. The ruler of the largest dynasty had previously proposed to become Tao companions with Venerable Yuan Bai. Perhaps it was because he had been searching for Venerable Yuan Bai for too long back then. But when the dynasty's ruler saw Venerable Yuan Bai for the first time, he realized that this lady could actually fill the hole in his heart. From then on, he had wanted to become Tao companions with Venerable Yuan Bai. It was just that Venerable Yuan Bai was not a supreme emperor back then, and the difference in strength between them was simply too great. As such, he could not disregard his status and become Tao companions with Venerable Yuan Bai. As such, he had waited until Venerable Yuan Bai had become a supreme emperor to raise his idea without any hesitation. To this peak supreme emperor who had controlled the largest dynasty for who knew how many trillions of years, he was already used to having all of his wishes fulfilled and all of his ideas obeyed. As such, when he raised this idea, he was extremely certain that his proposal would be accepted. Even the world, venerable title, and resources prepared for Venerable Yuan Bai had already been prepared. All that was left was for Venerable Yuan Bai to settle in. However, he did not expect Venerable Yuan Bai to directly state that he was only focused on Tao and had no intention of becoming Tao companions with other cultivators, thus rejecting him. The ruler of the dynasty, who had not been rejected for countless years, was stunned and almost lost his composure. Afterwards, he forced Venerable Yuan Bai to think about it for a while before leaving in a sorry state. At this time, the ruler had clearly regained his confidence. He felt that Venerable Yuan Bai had already thought about how perfect it would be for him to become Tao companions with him. So he came forward to ask again. "You've turned me down again?" The emperor frowned as disbelief filled his face. Venerable Yuan Bai's expression did not change. He said indifferently, "Isn't this only natural? From the moment I rejected you, this moment was already destined. I really am very sincere." The ruler frowned and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. As an existence that had controlled the dynasty for countless trillions of years, he had long forgotten how to pursue women and how to act subserviently. Even if it was for the sake of proposing marriage, he still acted rather unyielding. Even when he said some soft words, they were still extremely stiff. Why do you have to be like this? At our current realm, the relationship between a man and a woman is at most a decoration. If you say it's meaningless, then it's meaningless, Venerable Yuan said indifferently. I think it's meaningful. When I first saw you, I knew that you were the missing link in my life. Your existence can make me even more perfect, the dynasty's ruler said directly. He had no intention of hiding his thoughts, nor did he feel that there was a need to hide them. That's just a misconception, Venerable Yuan said indifferently. She had only appeared in this world for a little over 1,000,000 years, but the dynasty's ruler had already existed in this world for countless trillions of years. Their origins were completely unrelated, so how could there possibly be a true connection between them? Therefore, if the ruler felt that there was some inseparable connection between them, it was clearly just a misconception. You don't have to say anything more, fellow Taoist. I don't have the slightest intention of becoming Tao companions with anyone else. No matter what you say, even if the world is destroyed, it will still be the same. Venerable Yuan saw that the ruler still wanted to say something, so she directly stopped him and said this. As she spoke, she raised her hand and waved it. As supreme might surged forth, she forcefully severed the connection that the ruler of the dynasty had established from the palace to her sect. As the connection was cut off, the expression of the dynasty's ruler in the imperial palace stiffened. It had always been him who cut off other people's connections, but this time it was actually someone else who cut off the connection. Then he became extremely displeased. He had been rejected once again. He had shown such great sincerity and even acted subserviently, yet he was still rejected. It must be because she still hasn't thought it through. I'll give her some more time. After a long time, he forcibly convinced himself. At this moment, in the mountain gate, Venerable Yuan slightly furrowed her brows. He definitely won't give up just like that. After a while, he will definitely pester us again. Looks like we can't stay in this world anymore. She had studied the dynasty's ruler and knew that he had an extremely firm will and could even be said to be extremely stubborn. Such a person would definitely not give up on his plan just because of a few words from others, even if this plan required her cooperation. Therefore, although it seemed like he had suffered a huge blow, it was only temporary. Very soon, he would regroup and cause some more trouble. The dynasty's ruler had lived in this world for far too long. It was so long that it had even become a part of the laws of this world, a natural phenomenon of this world. Fighting against it here was equivalent to fighting against the heavens and the earth. Even if Venerable Yuan felt that his strength was superior to that of the other party, he also understood that if they really fought, it would definitely be quite troublesome. Perhaps he wouldn't suffer a loss, but he would definitely not have the energy to do other things. After understanding this, there was naturally no need to say what she had to do. Leaving this world was obviously the only option. As for how she could leave, there was even less to say. This world itself had a transcendence path, and as long as she took this path, she would naturally be able to transcend this world. It just so happened that this path of transcendence wasn't to transcend outwards, but inwardly. Transcending outwards was more in line with the logic of transcendence that she knew. However, one mustn't forget that her previous body was waiting for her outside. Transcending like this was simply sending herself to her doorstep. In comparison, transcending inwardly was obviously going in a different direction, and she would naturally be further away from her previous body. With this thought, she no longer hesitated, and the transcendence light gradually seeped out of her body. The light was so wondrous. After it appeared, it began to gradually form an indescribable interaction with the surrounding void. It caused the surrounding void, the surrounding time, the surrounding laws, the surrounding energy, the surrounding matter, the surrounding great ways, and everything else to produce an indescribable repulsive force against it. Due to this repulsive force, she suddenly felt an indescribable emptiness appear somewhere around her. The moment she sensed this emptiness, she no longer hesitated and her figure swayed as she stepped into that emptiness. As she stepped into that emptiness, the entire world started to tremble slightly. An indescribable transcendence aura was born from this mountain gate, and in the blink of an eye, it enveloped the void within a range of billions of kilometers. Not good. At this moment, the ruler of the largest imperial dynasty felt his heart skip a beat. In a flash, he had already traversed a distance of who knew how many light years and directly appeared outside the range of this transcendental charm. Stop. Hurry up and stop. If you don't want to accept it, then don't accept it. Why must you be so resolute? After confirming that this was the transcendence aura, he finally became anxious, and he continuously transmitted his voice into the transcendence aura and into Venerable Yuan Bai's ears. As an existence that had been in control of the largest imperial dynasty for trillions of years, the ruler had naturally seen other cultivators transcend, and he understood the signs of this transcendence. At this moment, this transcendence aura was clearly released by Venerable Yuan Bai when he chose to transcend. Hurry up. We can still turn back now, but we won't even have the chance to turn back later. The ruler roared continuously. At this moment, Venerable Yuan Bai turned a deaf ear to his roars. She had already planned to transcend and leave this world. However, even though she had such thoughts before, she had felt that the timing wasn't perfect, and she needed to wait and plan for a while longer. Under such circumstances, she had already begun to transcend, so she naturally went with the flow and brought forward the transcendence that she had originally thought would take some time to plan. How could she stop because of the ruler's words? Chapter 31:14. Indeed, the ruler of the dynasty was like the heavenly Tao in his own dynasty, and he could control almost all the laws of the dynasty. However, no matter what, it was only almost. For example, the transcendence path, which he needed to rely on in order to transcend, was obviously beyond his control. As such, even though he really wanted Venerable Yuan Bai to stay in this world, he had no way to stop him. All of his means seemed so powerless in front of the transcendence path. Any divine ability or magic art that tried to stop him were like clay oxen entering the sea when they entered the transcendence path. Under such circumstances, Venerable Yuan Bai's figure gradually disappeared under the light of transcendence and entered the transcendence path that would inevitably appear after transcendence. There are two choices. The moment he stepped into the transcendence path, Venerable Yuan Bai's eyes suddenly lit up. There were two choices in front of him. One was to enter the first layer of the Tao Master's path and completely transcend, leaving this island branch and the sixth layer of the Tao Master's path. The other option was to step into the second layer of this island. Although this island branch had just been formed not long ago, the number of foundation worlds in this island branch was much lower than before. However, because the number of island branches was much lower than before, there was now more than one foundation heaven and earth in each of the island branches that had been separated. The number of foundation worlds in each island branch was at least dozens of foundation worlds. For example, the number of foundation worlds in this island branch was nearly 1,000 foundation worlds. With so many foundation worlds, Venerable Yuan Bai naturally had a choice to enter the next layer of foundation worlds. Venerable Yuan Bai naturally knew which of the two choices he had to make was the correct one. Compared to the cultivators who were born and raised in the island branch, Venerable Yuan Bai, who was a clone of a sixth tribulation powerhouse, naturally knew that no matter how strong the foundation worlds were, they could only allow her to cultivate to this realm at most. Unless she could inherit the cultivation path of her previous body and inherit the karma of her previous body, she would only have a chance to become a tribulation expert by stepping on the Tao Master's path. After understanding this, was there still a need to say which of the two transcendent choices was the right one? Venerable Yuan Bai did not hesitate at all and chose to enter the first level of the Tao Master's path, transcending the island and the sixth level of the Tao Master's path. As she made her choice, the two routes in front of her began to diverge. The route that represented the first level of the Tao Master's path began to become more and more obvious and real, while the other route that led to the next level became more and more obscure and illusory. Obviously, the transcendence path naturally led her to the first layer of the path of Tao Master. Just at this moment, when the route was about to materialize, a layer of subtle clear light suddenly flashed and directly blocked the route to the first level of the Tao Master's path. As the clear light blocked the path, the changes between the two paths instantly stopped. Then, the changes reversed. The gradually solidifying route gradually became illusory, and the originally gradually illusory route gradually became solid. Not long after, the original route that led to the first level of the Tao Master's path had completely disappeared, as if it had never existed. In front of her, there was only the route that led to the next level of the Tao Master's path. What's going on? Venerable Yuan Bai was dumbfounded by the situation in front of her. She was clearly about to succeed. So why did it suddenly take a 180-degree turn? Since she had no choice, the process of transcendence naturally did not stop. Her figure moved forward quickly, and in the blink of an eye, she had already been sent to the second level of the island's branch. When she finally stabilized, Venerable Yuan Bai finally realized what had happened. Her choice had actually been erased by some existence. She could have directly transcended this island's branch, transcended the sixth level of the Tao Master's path, and completely got rid of her previous body. But this opportunity had actually been directly destroyed by some unknown existence. At this moment, she felt extremely uncomfortable, and she almost could not hold back her tears. It was such a perfect opportunity. Why did it stop me? She could not help but murmur. The agitation in her heart made it difficult for her to carefully think about what this meant. After waiting for a few hours, when she gradually calmed down from the grievance and anger, she began to think about the reason for everything that had happened. The existence behind this island's branch is stopping me. After thinking about it for a while, after eliminating all the impossibilities, the only possibility appeared. There was an extremely powerful existence behind this island's branch, and it might even be a seventh tribulation expert from the seventh level of the Tao Master's path. All the 6 tribulation experts who wanted to explore the mysteries of this island were aware of this. If they had not guessed this, they would not have had the mood to explore this island and the secrets of this island's branch. Therefore, at this time, they should have been able to transcend and leave this island's branch according to the rules. But in the end, they could not because of some unforeseen event. No matter how they looked at it, in the end, it could only be traced back to the 7th tribulation expert behind it. Don't tell me you want us to fight to the death with the original body? It's just a test. Is there a need to be so ruthless? Venerable Yuan Bai almost could not help but shout this out. Of course, it was only almost. Even if she had the strength and realm of her previous body, she wouldn't dare to act rashly in the face of a 7 tribulations powerhouse. Moreover, she could only be considered to have just recultivated. Her cultivation realm was millions of times worse than before. How could she have the confidence to provoke a 7th tribulation expert? At this time, her anger towards the 7th tribulation expert was so strong that it could burn the world, but she could only suppress all the anger in her heart. Not to mention anything else, it could be seen from the fact that the 7th tribulation expert had blocked her path to transcendence that it would be easy for the 7th tribulation expert to figure out how far she could go. After forcibly suppressing the anger and grievance in her heart, Venerable Yuan Bai began to pay attention to the world in front of her. In the end, she still believed that the 7th tribulation expert did not just forbid her from transcending for revenge. He must have more goals for luring her into this world. How could this world be like this? After seeing the world clearly, she could not help but be a little surprised. Compared to the previous first level, this world was like heaven and earth. In the previous first level, the civilization was extremely powerful, and the order was extremely strict. There was practically no chaos in the entire world. Even after experiencing countless tribulations, the world did not suffer much damage because of it. Instead, it obtained endless benefits from each tribulation, allowing the world to rise to an indescribable height. Not to mention other things, Even the dynasties had developed to the extent that the rulers of the dynasties were like the heavenly Tao. Although they were both worlds separated by only one level, the situation in the second level was almost the complete opposite of the first level. The entire world had long since become dilapidated. In the successive tribulations, the heavens, the earth, and even the earth had been completely shattered, turning into fragments that floated in the void like stars floating in the universe. Within the billions of pieces of land, there was a boundless, ominous aura that filled those pieces, making them look like they were in hell. As for the vitality that represented life, it was so thin that it was almost non-existent. If Venerable Yuan Bai's senses were not sharp enough, and his strength was not strong enough, he might have thought that the entire world was a dead and silent world at the end of the world. As for the barriers between heaven and earth, the stability of space, and the stability of time, all of them had been weakened to an unimaginable extent. It felt like as long as one had a little bit of cultivation knowledge, even if one did not have any power, one could easily pry open space, pry open the barriers between heaven and earth, travel between the pieces of earth, travel between the past and the future, and even travel between the inside and the outside of the world. Of course, being able to pry open space was one thing, and being able to survive after being pried open was another. What are the cultivators of this world doing? Why had this world been turned into such a state? I'm afraid they're only one step away from the destruction of the world. Sensing the boundless world in front of him, Venerable Yuan Bai could not help but curse inwardly. After witnessing the incomparably prosperous world on the first level, the intense contrast with the tragic world in front of her made her feel even more emotional. Don't tell me that you let me enter this world to save it, Venerable Yuan Bai muttered with a frown. She naturally did not get an answer to her muttering. In fact, ever since she stepped into this island branch, she did not receive any hint from the seven tribulation powerhouse behind this island branch. Everything about the goal of the seven tribulation powerhouse was just her own guess. Whether it was the idea of the seven tribulation powerhouse cutting off the connection between them and their previous bodies, the idea of the seven tribulation powerhouse allowing them to enter this island branch, or the intention of letting them cultivate as they wished, as well as the intention of blocking the other path of transcendence from her. All of these could only be guessed at the goal of the seven tribulation powerhouse. As for whether this guess was correct or not, it would obviously depend on whether their fates would change in the end. This world also had a path of transcendence. However, Venerable Yuan Bai no longer dared to casually step onto this path of transcendence. It was not because it was dangerous, but because if he stepped into it, it was very likely that he would waste an opportunity to transcend this island and merge into the first level of the Tao Master's path. Who knew how many worlds there were in this island branch? What if there are no more worlds after this one? If that was the case, the next two options for transcendence would obviously be the last two opportunities he had. In this way, once he missed the option to merge into the first level of the Tao Master's path, wouldn't it be equivalent to completely missing the opportunity to merge into the first level of the Tao Master's path? What was the probability of this happening? If she did nothing and directly tried to transcend now, then the probability of the option to merge into the first level of the Tao Master's path being completely blocked was almost 100%. After all, if she did nothing, the following transcendence would naturally be no different from the previous transcendence in the first level of the Tao Master's path. If that was the case, the result of this transcendence would naturally be the same as the previous one. In other words, the option to completely transcend would be blocked. Because of this, at this time, Venerable Yuan Bai did not dare to directly transcend and leave before doing anything. As for what the seven tribulation expert behind the island branch wanted her to do, she could obviously only rely on guesses. Helping this world and saving this world was obviously just a result of speculation. Whether it was true or not would depend on the treatment she received after saving this world. Fortunately, saving this world was actually in line with her own wishes. The tragedy of this world moved her quite a bit. At least at this time, she was willing to change the tragic scene of this world. With all these thoughts in her mind, she really made a decision and began to prepare to save this world. Currently, the biggest problem for the world was that the world itself was already broken beyond recognition. In such a world, it might collapse if the power was just a little bit stronger. Saving this world under such circumstances was simply like dancing in shackles. Obviously, Venerable Yuanbai was not willing to accept such treatment. Therefore, at this time, the first thing she needed to do was to repair this world and eliminate all the hidden dangers of the broken world. If an ordinary cultivator wanted to do this, it would naturally be a fool's dream. However, it was obvious that this was only true for ordinary cultivators. For Venerable Yuanbai, who could directly memorize all the ancient books in the library of the previous world's largest imperial court, it was troublesome to do this, but not too difficult. At this time, she carefully observed the countless earth fragments, and very soon, she chose one of the fragments. Then, with a flash of her figure, she appeared on top of the shard. Chapter 31:15. In the first layer of the island's branch, after Venerable Yuanbai transcended, the transcendence charm that had appeared because of her attempt to transcend dissipated at an unimaginable speed. In just a short while, it had completely disappeared as if it had never existed. The dynasty's ruler felt his heart sink as he looked at the world that had returned to normal. The situation in front of him clearly indicated that Venerable Yuanbai's transcendence had ended. However, although his heart had sunk to rock bottom, he still had some wishful thinking. Perhaps she had failed to transcend. If that was the case, he might be able to take advantage of the situation. As he thought of this, he could no longer hold himself back. He took a step forward, and his figure directly passed through all the defensive abilities, techniques, and formations that originally existed in this mountain gate. He went straight to the place where Venerable Yuanbai had last appeared before he transcended. After arriving here, he was completely dumbfounded. This was because there were no traces of Venerable Yuanbai here at all. Only bits and pieces of traces of transcendence were quickly dissipating. "No, why did you leave me behind?" The dynasty's ruler felt like he had been struck by lightning, and he could not help but cry out. His voice was like thunder, and it reverberated wildly within the dynasty that he ruled. As the voice reverberated, the entire sky within the dynasty's territory darkened, and an indescribable sense of oppression instantly affected the hearts of all the living beings within the dynasty's territory. At this moment, all the living beings could clearly feel that the sky had changed. Only the more intelligent cultivators, who had a high enough cultivation realm and were knowledgeable enough, knew that all of this was because the dynasty's ruler's mood had become oppressive. Most of the living beings who did not have a high enough cultivation realm and were not knowledgeable enough thought that something incomprehensible had happened to the world, and even suspected that the end of the world was about to arrive. The dynasty's ruler clearly did not care about the impact of his emotions on the dynasty's interior. To him, the dynasty's existence was only to bring him convenience, not to make him worry about it or to make him provide services. Under such circumstances, he would care if there were any problems with the living beings in the dynasty that affected his function of providing convenience to him. However, if it did not affect the function of providing convenience to him, and it was just some sort of change in the hearts of the living beings in the dynasty, it was nothing worth mentioning to him. This kind of weather lasted for more than 10 days. After more than 10 days, the dynasty's ruler finally calmed down. As his heart calmed down, the sky within 1 billion light years of the empire returned to normal. The pressure in everyone's hearts gradually disappeared. Of course, during these 10 days, under the unbelievable pressure, the living beings in the empire were naturally in a rather serious state of chaos, causing the entire empire to suffer great losses. Just the number of lives lost would probably be calculated in the trillions. The consumption of all kinds of resources, the destruction of all kinds of facilities, the chaos of all kinds of laws, and the damage of all kinds of laws were almost innumerable. One could say that the dynasty's loss in the past 10 days alone was enough to multiply a certain world civilization by several times. However, all of these losses were insignificant to the dynasty's ruler and were not even worth mentioning. He did not even have the mood to care about that. At that moment, After more than 10 days of calming down, he had completely calmed down. He had a rough idea of what to do next. Do you think you can get rid of me just because you've transcended? As he thought about this, he turned around and took a step forward. His figure had already returned to his palace. As soon as he arrived, he directly gave out orders one after another. The entire dynasty was like a machine that was in a deep sleep that was gradually being activated. All of the resources in the entire dynasty began to be mobilized in the process. An incomparably huge altar was gradually being built in the capital of the dynasty. The altar was so huge and brilliant that it was far beyond the imagination of ordinary cultivators. In this altar alone, there were a total of 129,600 different worlds in 100 years. There were also all sorts of strange resources that were innumerable. If it would really be expanded, it would probably be enough to cover a vast area that was calculated in light years. The number of cultivators who participated in the construction of the altar was calculated in the hundreds of millions. Even though so many resources and manpower were invested, it still took close to 10,000 years for the altar to take shape. To the ruler of the empire, 10,000 years was naturally not even a fraction of time. However, to the ordinary living beings in the dynasty, it could even be passed down for hundreds of generations. It could be said that the ordinary people living in the capital had almost directly regarded the construction of the altar as a natural phenomenon. They almost thought that such an altar would definitely be built as soon as the world appeared, and there would definitely be all sorts of preparations made for the construction of the altar. On this day, the body of the dynasty's ruler, who was waiting in the palace with his eyes closed, shook, and he opened his eyes that had been shut for 10,000 years. At that moment, a supreme sovereign came from outside and greeted the dynasty's ruler. "Your Majesty, the altar has been completed and can be used at any time." As the dynasty's ruler, who was at the peak of the supreme sovereign realm, it was impossible for there to be only one supreme sovereign in the country. There were also a large number of supreme sovereigns among his subordinates and his subjects. The person before him was the supreme sovereign who was in charge of building the altar among his subordinates. "Good. Well done," the dynasty's ruler said calmly. As he spoke, he looked up. His eyes seemed to be able to penetrate the world and see a certain place beyond the world. "Wait for me. No matter where you go, I will definitely find you." With that thought, he slowly stood up. As he stood up, an extremely dignified aura surged out of his body. In an instant, the entire area within the dynasty's territory that was billions of light years was instantly enveloped by the aura. At that moment, all living beings knew that an extremely significant change was about to occur. Amidst such an aura, the empire's ruler's figure flashed and arrived at the altar that was constructed from at least 129,600 worlds and all sorts of strange materials. The altar did not seem very tall. It was only 1,000,000 feet tall. Compared to the tallest building in the capital, it was not that much taller. Compared to ordinary altars, an altar of such a height was naturally tall and shocking. However, if one considered how many resources and materials were integrated into the altar, one would know that such a height was nothing at all. Putting everything else aside, any one of the 129,600 worlds was already millions of times higher than this height. The moment the dynasty's ruler stood on the altar, he felt as if his body had expanded thousands of times. It was as if his entire body and mind had completely fused with the entire dynasty. "I've finally succeeded," the dynasty's ruler thought to himself, as he sensed that his body and mind seemed to have fused with the entire dynasty. Transcending was not a difficult thing for him. Even if he followed Venerable Yuan Bai's path of transcendence and transcended, it would not be too troublesome for him to chase after Venerable Yuan Bai. However, evidently, this was not what he wanted. If he wanted to transcend like this, he would have done so billions of years ago. Therefore, although he could have transcended like this a long time ago, and he could easily transcend like this with his current ability, he still did not plan to transcend just like that. As for what he was thinking, it was very clear when he looked at the altar. His plan was to take his entire kingdom and all the living beings within it to transcend. Such a plan could not be denied as crazy. However, as the ruler of the dynasty and as an existence that was regarded as close to the heavenly Tao by all the living beings in the dynasty, he clearly had the courage to do so. At this moment, he had already condensed the entire region of the dynasty into one with the altar. He had completely fused with the entire dynasty, making the entire dynasty his body from a certain point of view. Transcending with the dynasty was clearly many times more difficult than transcending on his own. However, compared to transcending on his own, the benefits he would obtain after transcending will be many times greater if he led the dynasty to transcend in the end. After all, as long as he could truly transcend with the dynasty, he would not have to worry about losing all the conveniences he could obtain from the dynasty after transcending. At that time, he would still be able to maintain his current strength, his current supplies, his current resources, and his current authority. Most importantly, he would be able to have the confidence he had now in front of Venerable Yuan Bai. Compared to everything else, the last point was actually the most important one. At this moment, the many cultivators who had been building the altar had clearly retreated. Only the ruler of the dynasty, who was emitting a boundless and dignified aura, stood on the altar that was millions of meters tall. Although it was only 1,000,000 meters tall, due to the altar's own magical effect, one could see everything within billions of light years of the dynasty with just a glance from here. It was as if both the altar and himself had suddenly grown billions of times larger. I can start now. With that thought, he slowly activated the altar. He could already sense such an obvious change when he was merely standing on the altar earlier. Now that he had truly activated the altar, it went without saying how great the change would be. In just an instant, indescribable light was emitted from the sky and the ground within billions of light years of the dynasty. The light came in clusters. Although they were extremely dense, there were still all sorts of subtle gaps between the lights. Subsequently, the lights began to circulate gradually. An extremely complicated circulation began to take place within the entire territory of the dynasty. Every cluster of light gradually passed through indescribable, mysterious trajectories in the void. And no matter how far away these lights were from the altar, their final destination and starting point were still the altar. Furthermore, no matter how far they were from the altar, even if they were billions of light years away, the time they would take to reach the altar was extremely short. If one were to take a closer look at the lights, the speed at which each cluster of light circulated seemed to be rather slow and natural. However, it was precisely this slow and natural circulation method that allowed it to pass through in an unimaginably short amount of time. It was a distance that light would need to calculate in billions of years to traverse. It was as if time and space were meaningless in this kingdom at this moment. What's going on? At that moment, billions of people in the kingdom could not help but wonder. They could instinctively tell that the change was related to the ruler of the dynasty. However, they had no idea what exactly it was and what the outcome of the change would be. The entire dynasty transcended together. It's no wonder that he's the most powerful existence among us. At that moment, in another dynasty far away, the ruler of the dynasty could not help but sigh as he sensed something. Although they were extremely far away, to the extent that even light years could not accurately describe the distance between them, there was still a subtle connection between them as the rulers of the dynasty. This subtle connection allowed them to faintly sense each other's state. At this moment, all the rulers of the empires in this world knew what the ruler of the largest empire was planning at the same time. After understanding his plan, they were all extremely shocked. Be it admiring his boldness or secretly cursing his stupidity, none of them would remain indifferent to his action. After all, he was transcending together with billions of living beings in the dynasty and the space-time of the dynasty. Regardless of whether he succeeded or not, it represented his unimaginable boldness. Chapter 31:16. The transcendence of the largest dynasty was obviously a huge plan and a huge event that had never happened in this world for billions of years. It was easy to imagine the attention that such an event attracted at this time. At this moment, cultivators from all over the world, no matter where they were hidden, even if they were hidden in different space-times or in different worlds, started to pay attention to the largest dynasty through various methods. Cultivators who were qualified to transcend, but did not transcend, generally did so because there were things in this world that they could not let go of. In fact, it was not that they did not have any desire to transcend. It was just that compared to the desire to transcend, they could not let go of some things in this world. If the ruler of the largest empire was able to succeed this time, it would clearly open up a brand new path for them, giving them a chance to have the best of both worlds. They wouldn't have to give up on the things that they originally couldn't let go of in this world, and they would also be able to obtain a chance to improve further. With such a mentality, they naturally paid even more attention to the matter of transcendence. At this moment, countless gazes gathered on this transcendence event. At this moment, the vast dynasty that spanned hundreds of millions of light years was filled with endless light. The trajectory of the countless light rays had completely taken shape and truly stabilized. A kind of integrated charm began to gradually radiate from the vast area that spanned hundreds of millions of light years. It was as if this dynasty had truly become a complete living thing. Come on, let's transcend together. The ruler of the dynasty who stood on the altar roared. The roar spread through every inch of space within the territory of the dynasty, reaching the hearts of the people who were bewildered by the changes occurring within the territory of the dynasty. His Majesty wants to transcend together with us. At this moment, all living beings suddenly understood what was happening. At this moment, indescribable emotions welled up in the hearts of all living beings. In fact, not many living beings in this dynasty knew what benefits transcendence would bring them. However, even if they did not know the specific benefits of transcendence, the word transcendence was enough to show that this was something that would definitely bring them great benefits. At this moment, the ruler of the dynasty, who could transcend on his own, insisted on transcending with them. He wanted to share the benefits of transcendence with them. How could they not be touched? At that moment, almost all the living beings in the dynasty that spanned hundreds of millions of light years knelt in the direction of the palace at the same time. They prayed to the heavens with great sincerity, praying that the ruler of the dynasty would successfully bring them to transcend. As they prayed, they constantly showed their loyalty to the ruler of the dynasty and expressed their gratitude. It could be said that this was the first time the largest dynasty had been so united since it was born. All living beings were praying for the same goal and longing for the same goal to be achieved. At this moment, the ruler of the dynasty who stood on the altar in the center revealed a faint smile. The prayers of the countless living beings created an extremely profound effect. Not only did it gather practically all the power in the dynasty onto the altar, but even vaguely distorted the laws of the world, as well as the laws of the world. It caused the terrifying tribulation that was about to descend to suddenly weaken slightly. That's right, his transcendence this time would bring about an unbelievable tribulation. After all, he was not transcending on his own. He was transcending the entire world. Transcending on their own was because cultivators were self-sufficient. Not only did they not need to consume the world's resources, but they could also return the favor to the world. Transcending on their own was quite a pity for the world. Although it was quite a pity for the world to transcend, the world would not suffer much damage because of this. Even if the world was unwilling to let the cultivator transcend, it would at most set up some obstacles so that it would not be easy for the cultivator to transcend. However, there would not be any tribulations that would attack the cultivator. However, at this moment, the ruler of the dynasty was transcending the entire world. This was clearly different from transcending on his own. Just the billions of living beings that he would have to bring with him during the process of transcending was already enough to cause great damage to the world, let alone the fact that he would have to forcefully cut off a large portion of the world when he transcended and bring them with him. Both of them could be said to be greatly damaging the world. They were both cutting off the world's flesh. As such, compared to the reluctance of the cultivator to transcend on his own, the world clearly detested the cultivator's attempt to transcend with the entire world. The world's detest was clearly going to be expressed in the form of a tribulation. As such, when the ruler of the dynasty attempted to transcend with the entire world, it was already destined that the tribulation would descend. This kind of transcendence would definitely attract all sorts of terrifying attacks from the world. However, now that all living beings in the dynasty were praying for the ruler to successfully transcend, the laws and rules of the world were distorted. As a result, the tribulation that should have appeared and would not rest until he was dead weakened slightly, increasing the chances of the ruler surviving the tribulation by a little. The reason why the prayers of the living beings that wanted to transcend with the ruler were effective and weakened the tribulation that the ruler would encounter was actually very simple. It was actually like a father and daughter. Any father would clearly detest an outsider who wanted to take his daughter away and would want nothing more than to beat the bastard to death. However, if the daughter wholeheartedly wanted to follow the bastard, wholeheartedly begged the father to let her go, and wholeheartedly wanted to obtain the father's blessing, what could the father do? At most, the father could only make things difficult for the bastard and show him some attitude before watching his daughter be taken away. At this moment, the world was that father, and the living beings were that daughter. To the world, if the ruler of the dynasty wanted to transcend with the living beings in the dynasty, it would be like a bastard who wanted to take his daughter away from his family. Naturally, it would be extremely detested. However, at this moment, the living beings were continuously praying and begging the ruler of the dynasty to take them away more smoothly. Clearly, it was like a daughter continuously begging her father to let her leave with the bastard. As such, the tribulation that should have appeared would be greatly weakened. However, it was obvious that no matter how weak it was, the tribulation would not appear. It was just like a father. No matter how much he was persuaded by his daughter, it was impossible for him to be nice to the bastard. At that moment, the world shook and dark clouds appeared out of nowhere, covering the sky within a radius of billions of light years in the dynasty. An indescribable pressure descended from the sky and directly fell on the entire dynasty, causing all the living beings in the dynasty to feel a sense of fear that surged from the bottom of their hearts. Among them, the person who felt it the most was naturally the ruler of the dynasty on the altar in the center. At this moment, he felt like he was the enemy of the entire world. The various laws, powers, and mysterious and indescribable things that were originally open to him unconditionally were completely isolated from him at this moment. Everything that he had obtained over billions of years seemed to have been completely lost. The world was furious. At that moment, he was unprecedentedly certain of this. The pressure grew stronger and stronger. In the end, when it reached a certain limit, endless attacks descended from the sky and fell on the entire dynasty as if they were going to wipe out the entire dynasty completely. At that moment, the ruler of the dynasty felt a jolt in his heart as he faced the endless attacks. As the altar beneath his feet trembled violently, endless power and endless brilliance began to erupt madly. In the blink of an eye, it had already enveloped the entire dynasty, completely blocking all the attacks that were descending from the sky. The light and the power shook violently. Countless shards scattered out of it in a frenzy. Meanwhile, the altar beneath the dynasty's ruler's feet was shaking even more violently. The entire altar had already been completely activated at this moment. It was like a hub that connected everything within the entire dynasty. Clearly, this way, he could easily use the altar to mobilize everything within the dynasty. Of course, at the same time, since it was already connected to everything within the entire dynasty, it was naturally affected by the various encounters within the dynasty. The attacks that landed in various parts of the dynasty would naturally be reflected on the altar as well. The dark clouds that covered an unknown number of light years in the sky clearly did not appear just for a single wave of attacks. As a result, the various attacks in the sky became denser and more terrifying. As they descended, they wanted to completely destroy the entire empire. Facing the attacks that were becoming more and more powerful and terrifying as time passed, the ruler of the dynasty's expression became more and more solemn. Although it seemed like he could still easily use everything within the dynasty to fend off the endless attacks, the dynasty's ruler's expression became more and more solemn. However, the power within the dynasty only relied on the dynasty itself. Compared to the power of the world, it was still limited. With that being the case, the altar that used the dynasty as its foundation clearly could not compare to the unbelievable retribution clouds that used the world as its foundation. Therefore, if he continued to fend off the retribution clouds like this, unless the world itself took the initiative to restrain itself, his failure was almost certain. As various thoughts flashed through his mind, he began to look for other opportunities to deal with the retribution clouds. Time passed bit by bit in this process. Unknowingly, close to 3 years had already passed. Over the past 3 years, the Calamity Cloud had displayed all sorts of strange techniques. It had unleashed countless attacks that even the ruler of the empire found eye-opening. It was absolutely possible that the empire would be completely destroyed. Faced with the various techniques and attacks, the ruler of the dynasty could only block them wholeheartedly. He did his best to dismantle the various techniques and attacks of the retribution clouds, and in the process, he did his best to search for the retribution cloud's weakness. He wanted to get rid of the retribution clouds before he could not withstand the attacks of the retribution clouds. After observing for 3 years, the results were rather remarkable. On this day, the ruler of the dynasty finally found the opportunity he had been waiting for 3 years after blocking the wave of attacks that seemed to have erupted from thousands of worlds. In just an instant, the countless living beings who had been praying for 3 years suddenly felt their hearts lighten, as if an incomparably huge river had connected all of them. Or rather, all of their hearts had gathered together, forming an incomparably huge river that charged towards the retribution clouds in the sky. Assimilated. The voice of the ruler of the dynasty spread through the hearts of all living beings in that instant, allowing them to understand why this river had appeared. Naturally, the living beings in the dynasty were extremely grateful to the ruler of the dynasty, who was going to lead the entire dynasty to transcend the world, and they were extremely convinced. Since the ruler of the dynasty said that they could assimilate the retribution clouds, then they believed that they could assimilate the retribution clouds. A strong aura of assimilation was produced in the hearts of all living beings, and they moved towards the retribution clouds in the sky. The retribution clouds were vast and boundless, covering an area with a radius of hundreds of millions of light years in the entire dynasty. Its vastness was self-evident. However, such retribution clouds could be touched no matter which direction one went. Therefore, at this moment, the retribution clouds were penetrated by the long river without any resistance at all. As the river penetrated it, the retribution clouds began to tremble violently. The next round of attacks that had been brewing immediately stopped at this moment, as if it had some scruples and did not dare to really erupt. It's working. The souls of all living beings sensed this change at the same time, and they were wild with joy at that moment. The aura of assimilation that they emitted became even more intense. They had been praying for 3 years in the retribution clouds, and they had some sense of the pattern of changes in the retribution clouds. Naturally, they knew what the pause at this moment meant, and of course, they trusted the judgment of the dynasty's ruler even more. Chapter 31:17. This pause was like a switch, causing the calamity that had been going on for 3 years to come to an end. An indescribable light of transcendence gradually spread out from the entire dynasty, making the entire dynasty look like an extremely shocking, gigantic body of light. The light of transcendence that was being emitted covered the entire world, enveloping the entire area within it. At this moment, all the cultivators in this world who were paying attention to this tribulation understood that the great drama of transcendence had reached its final step. Next, the answer to whether the greatest dynasty could transcend would soon be revealed. In the face of such a situation, everyone's gazes became increasingly solemn. Inexplicable excitement and anticipation began to surge in their hearts. The significance of the greatest dynasty's transcendence was just too great. If they could transcend successfully, it would mean that this world had a brand new path of transcendence. It would mean that they had a brand new soar. Therefore, even though they knew that their transcendence would definitely cause great damage to this world, they still hoped that they could succeed. The light of transcendence from the greatest dynasty grew brighter and more condensed. In the end, it seemed to have turned into a crystal, making the entire world seem to have turned into a huge piece of amber. Soon after, a certain moment, when the cultivator's anticipation reached its limit, the world shook violently. The entire world seemed like clothes that had been thrown into a washing machine, and it even produced all sorts of indescribably strange deformations. As for cracks, they covered every corner of the world, and they practically illuminated the entire world to the point that it seemed as if it was completely formed from extremely fine fragments. Facing this situation, the many cultivators who were paying attention to the great drama of transcendence suddenly understood that the result had already been revealed. In that instant, they did not dare to be careless. They unleashed all of their abilities, suppressing the world and stabilizing it, pulling it back from the brink of destruction. Among these cultivators, there were many Emperor Stage cultivators and Despair Stage cultivators. As for false saints, there were countless of them. Although it was not easy for so many cultivators to stabilize the world, it was not too troublesome either. In the end, even though the world seemed to be on the verge of collapse and destruction, it still stabilized after a long time. The endless cracks in the world had completely disappeared, as if they had never appeared in the first place. As the world stabilized, figures set off from all over the world, drawing long traces in the void as they headed for the location of the greatest dynasty. In the blink of an eye, countless cultivators appeared before the indescribable abyss. He succeeded, seeing the abyss where even time and space had disappeared. The many cultivators were completely convinced of their previous guesses. The abyss seemed boundless and deep, but compared to the original dynasty, it was billions of times smaller. The reason why there was an abyss that was billions of times smaller after the disappearance of the largest empire was that when the empire disappeared, not only did it take away all the land, all the living beings, and all the energy in the empire, but it also took away the space-time within the empire's territory. When the space-time was taken away, the place where the dynasty used to be was equivalent to not existing at all. As a matter of fact, if the process of being taken away was relatively gentle, they would definitely not be able to see the abyss now. They would only be able to see the scene on the other side of the dynasty that was originally blocked by the territory of the dynasty. It was as if the dynasty had never existed. However, the disappearance of the dynasty was too violent. Such a violent disappearance made it difficult for the great Tao, rules, and laws of the world to react immediately. Therefore, the rules, laws, and great Tao that existed when the dynasty existed formed a huge gap with the rules, laws, and great Tao after the dynasty disappeared. Such a gap made it difficult for the rules, laws, and great Tao to stabilize. As a result, an indescribable chaotic area was formed, forming such an abyss. It could be said that the abyss was not a mockery left behind after the dynasty disappeared, but mockery formed after the rules, laws, and great Tao became chaotic. It was precisely because of this that the breadth of the abyss naturally did not correspond to the breadth of the dynasty itself. However, such an abyss obviously could not really exist for too long. This world had experienced countless tribulations, and its ability to endure disasters had long reached an unbelievable level. Although losing a large piece of space-time was a great loss to the world, it was not to the extent that the world could not recover forever. Therefore, it would not take long for the abyss to be gradually filled up and erased by the natural operation of the laws of the world and the natural operation of the great Tao in this world. Looks like I have to start preparing as well. At this moment, a ruler of the dynasty mumbled and turned to leave. When the other cultivators saw this, their eyes lit up, and they immediately turned to leave. In the blink of an eye, only a few cultivators who were interested in the abyss remained. As for the future development of this world, the ruler of the largest empire naturally did not care. At this moment, He had brought his entire dynasty into the Transcendence Tunnel, as if he was carrying a piece of land. The reason why it was called Su-di and not space-time or a world was very simple. It was because all the elements of the dynasty were completely inherited from that world. In other words, its structure was perfect. This kind of perfection caused it to surpass the world itself, not to mention space-time. It could be said that as long as there was a place that could accommodate it, then this place would be able to stand firm and grow continuously. In the end, it would pluck away this place and become a true heaven and earth. Perhaps it was because of the worldly transcendence. The Transcendence Passage originally had two paths, but now there was only one. The swelling that originally existed and flowed into the first level of the Tao Master's path did not appear in front of the dynasty's ruler as if it did not exist at all. Naturally, the dynasty's ruler did not notice this situation at all. After all, even though he had a deep understanding of transcendence, he had never transcended himself after all. Naturally, he did not know what would happen when he transcended and what kind of swelling he would encounter when he transcended. To him, there was nothing unusual about this transcendence path that kept moving forward along the Transcendence Passage. Naturally, he did not feel any psychological burden at all as he led his entire dynasty to the other end of the Transcendence Passage. Compared to other cultivators who were transcending, the only exception was the slight pause during the transcendence process. They would be able to pass through the Transcendence Passageway in the blink of an eye. However, the speed at which the dynasty's ruler led his entire dynasty through the Transcendence Passageway was relatively slow. It felt like a snail was wriggling bit by bit. After spending almost 10,000 years in the dynasty, he finally arrived at the end of the Transcendence Passage and saw the destination of his transcendence. Is it the void? How could it be the void? When he arrived at the destination of transcendence, the dynasty's ruler's anticipation instantly disappeared without a trace. This was because what appeared in front of him was not a world, nor was it venerable Yuan by that he had expected. Instead, it was an indescribable void. This void was divided into countless layers, and he could not sense what was in each layer at all. He only knew that there were some things that he could not imagine in the countless layers of the void, and changes that he could not understand were taking place. Just as he was feeling shocked, the land of the dynasty he had brought out began to merge with the layer of void he was in with an uncontrollable momentum. In just a short while, he had completely integrated into the void. The instant the empire completely fused with the void, he suddenly felt an indescribable pressure acting on the empire from all directions, causing it to creak. It was as if it could not endure the indescribable pressure and was about to collapse under the pressure. Faced with such a change, the dynasty's ruler was shocked. He did not dare to be negligent, and hurriedly activated the altar that was connected to the entire dynasty. The laws and principles of the entire dynasty began to gather together once again. The various interfaces that were originally opened to accept other laws and principles quickly closed up, and during this process of closing, Su-di started to give birth to something that originally didn't exist. Vaguely, the silhouette of the great Tao was gradually being born in the unseen world. As soon as the image was born, it started to solidify at an unimaginable speed. In just a few short breaths, it had become a true great Tao. The moment the great path took form, the land of the empire trembled. An indescribable joy was released from the land, directly filling the hearts of all living beings in the empire. All living beings felt an indescribable joy emerge from the depths of their hearts in that instant. Even the dynasty's ruler was no exception. This is the joy of the world. At this moment, all living beings understood what this joy was and where it came from. All sorts of indescribable information appeared in the dynasty's ruler's heart out of nowhere, causing him to suddenly understand what he had gained. It seems like the bottleneck no longer exists. Sensing the endless information, he could not help but have this thought flash through his mind. With this thought, he only needed to activate it slightly. His cultivation level, which was already at the peak of the Emperor realm, silently took a step forward, stepping into a whole new realm. Although he had only taken a step forward, he felt as if he had crossed the distance between the heavens and the earth. In just a short moment, he had risen to a level that was unimaginable before. He felt as if he could easily blow his previous self into dust with just a single breath. This is the reward of transcendence. A complicated emotion that was both sad and happy instantly surged from the bottom of his heart. As the ruler of the largest dynasty, he had been stuck at the peak supreme emperor realm for who knew how many trillions of years. Over these trillions of years, he had spent an immeasurable amount of effort, used countless methods, and even tried many methods. It could be said that they were uncountable. However, no matter what methods he used or what methods he tried, he could not take even the slightest step forward from the peak supreme emperor realm. Because of this, he did not know when it had started, but he no longer had any extravagant hopes of taking another step forward. In fact, if it was not for the existence of the path of transcendence, he would have thought that the peak supreme emperor realm was already the peak of cultivation. However, this time, he had only just transcended. He did not even truly understand his current situation, but he had already easily broken through the bottleneck that he had spent trillions of years without being able to shake. He had easily stepped into a brand new realm that he did not even dare to imagine. This was simply like a person who had spent his entire life's savings to hire someone to teach him how to open a super powerful lock that would exist thousands of years later in order to open the door to some treasure vault. However, at a certain moment, when he still could not achieve his goal, even after spending his entire life savings, he casually pulled and realized that the huge lock was not actually a lock at all. It was just that it was not pushed but pulled. It was easy to imagine how complicated his feelings were. After being dazed for a long time, the dynasty's ruler sighed and finally regained his composure. No matter what the process was like, he had finally stepped into a brand new realm and obtained a breakthrough that he could not even imagine for trillions of years. At this moment, the entire dynasty began to undergo an inexplicable change. The entire world began to expand involuntarily. The area that was originally the size of a dynasty expanded more than 10 times in the blink of an eye. On the other hand, the region where the order was expanding was outside of the empire's territory. It did not have much effect on the empire's territory. The various structures in the dynasty remained the same and did not change because of the change. Chapter 31:18. At the same time, an indescribable aura kept spreading from the depths of the dynasty's small universe. It began to seep into the bodies and minds of all the living beings in the small universe. As the aura seeped in, the living beings began to feel an indescribable feeling. It was as if there were no more obstacles before them all of a sudden. As long as they were willing, they could break through the bottleneck that they had encountered before and achieve a leap in their abilities. Instinctively, they knew that this was the benefit of detaching from the dynasty. As a result, they naturally struggled according to the feeling without any hesitation. As they struggled, the living beings experienced an indescribable sublimation in their bodies and minds, just as they had expected. Those with a cultivation base would be able to raise their cultivation by one or more realms. Those who did not had a great improvement in their basic qualities. Some of them even directly developed some special abilities, turning from ordinary creatures to existences like ability users by the time the aura disappeared. All the living beings in the dynasty's small universe had become very different from before. An indescribable joy surged from the bottom of the living beings' hearts at that moment. This time, it was not the joy from the small universe that surged, but joy that came from the bottom of their hearts. Your Majesty, please be merciful. Unknowingly, a large number of living beings began kneeling at where the dynasty's ruler was and cheered loudly. In the beginning, only a portion of the living beings did that. However, as their actions were seen by other living beings, the other living beings followed suit and began to do the same. They also kneeled at where the dynasty's ruler was and cheered loudly. Naturally, it was impossible for the voices of a portion of the living beings to reach where the dynasty's ruler was so easily. However, as the number of living beings who were cheering increased to billions and billions, The area where they were spread out directly covered the entire dynasty's small universe. The situation was clearly different. As a matter of fact, the dynasty's ruler did not even need to use his senses that had merged with the universe. He could hear the cheers that seemed to come from the small universe with his ears alone. At that moment, he felt a little emotional for some reason. Initially, he wanted to detach from the world with the dynasty because as the dynasty's ruler, he would receive various indescribable blessings. He could not bear to part with such blessings. However, he did not pay much attention to the people in the empire. However, he did not expect that his action of not taking them seriously would gain their unanimous support and become the source of their gratitude. They worked together to create such an exaggerated effect of gratitude. How could he not be touched? Perhaps I should do more for them. Such a thought emerged in his mind. As this thought emerged in his mind, his originally somewhat unstable state of mind began to gradually stabilize. His disappointed mood from not being able to find Venerable Yuan by also gradually calmed down. I have transcended, and so has she. As long as I continue to grow, I will eventually be able to find her. Perhaps she didn't think highly of me before because my achievements weren't high enough. Now that I have forged an incomparably perfect foundation, my future achievements will definitely make her look at me in a different light. If that's the case, she will never reject me again. In the bottom of his heart, this thought was deeply hidden. From a certain point of view, this dynasty's ruler was quite naive. As the ruler of this dynasty, when the dynasty became a true world, he naturally obtained unimaginable authority. It was precisely because of this authority that his cultivation realm was forcefully pushed from the peak supreme emperor level to the tribulation stage powerhouse. At this moment, with just a thought, he felt as if he had completely fused with the entire dynasty's small world, or rather, the dynasty's world. Every breath he took resonated with the dynasty's world. Every breath he took was also rubbing against his body at the same time, so it was difficult to achieve a similar effect. Compared to before, when the dynasty's world was still the dynasty's world, this feeling was fundamentally different. Although the dynasty's world seemed to have completely fused with him, it actually felt more like he was wearing a suit of armor. Although the two were indeed one, there was still a clear boundary between them. However, now that the dynasty had turned into a world of dynasties, the fusion was like the fusion of blood and flesh. It was as if only after they truly fused together would they become a complete body. As for the barriers between them, there was not a single thing that could be found. Vaguely, the dynasty's ruler could feel that the world had merged into an unimaginably grand system. At every moment, the world seemed to be communicating indescribably with countless other worlds. Through this communication, the dynasty's world seemed to provide some insignificant help to the other worlds. However, compared to the help the dynasty's world provided to the other worlds, the benefits he obtained from the communication were even greater. At every moment, the world of the dynasty was constantly improving and sublimating along with every aspect of the world itself, along with this kind of interaction. This improvement and sublimating naturally led to the dynasty's ruler, who had fused with the dynasty's world, to improve and sublimating as well. As a result, the dynasty's ruler, who had just broken through the bottleneck and become a tribulation initiation powerhouse, began to improve at a slow but continuous pace. Worldview, as his cultivation base improved bit by bit, the dynasty's ruler unknowingly comprehended the key to cultivation for tribulation initiation powerhouses. Compared to the cultivators in the big world, the cultivators who were born and raised on the island like the dynasty rulers had a great disadvantage. It was the lack of knowledge. The lack of knowledge caused them to be unable to summarize their worldview bit by bit when their cultivation base was not high enough. They could not perfect their understanding of the world, the universe, and everything in the world bit by bit. Therefore, they could not be like the cultivators in the big world, who began working hard in this direction from the innate zenith heaven stage. If they had started working hard in this direction from then on, by the time they became tribulation initiation powerhouses, these many concepts would at least have formed a rough outline. If they took the path of going against the flow, it would be enough to form a complete worldview when they reached that stage. On the other hand, the native creatures of this island didn't have such knowledge. Although their cultivation could not be said to be following the rules, they did not deepen their understanding of cultivation to the level of worldview. Even if he occasionally achieved the same result through different means in his cultivation, there was no way for him to truly summarize the principles of his worldview. Therefore, even if the dynasty's ruler had become a tribulation initiation powerhouse by relying on the opportunity, he still did not begin to summarize his own concepts and began to prepare to build his unique worldview. At this moment, as he fused with the heaven and earth of the dynasty and used the heaven and earth of the dynasty to communicate with the boundless heaven and earth of the outside world, he finally obtained some sort of revelation from this kind of communication. He finally lifted the cognitive barrier that originally covered him, and he understood the key to summing up his unique worldview. So that's how it is. No wonder I sometimes cultivate fast and sometimes cultivate slowly. After understanding the crux of the world, the dynasty's ruler came to a sudden realization. He finally had no more doubts about the many mysterious details that puzzled him throughout the entire cultivation process. As he realized that the tribulation initiation powerhouse that was initially a little unstable stabilized. Of course, although it had stabilized, it was not really flawless. Instead, it seemed like the framework had been fixed. However, there were still countless loopholes and flaws in the framework. Those were the flaws that occurred when he entered the tribulation initiation powerhouse without summarizing his own concepts. Initially, when he did not realize the key to the worldview, the loopholes and flaws seemed like they did not exist because there was no framework. He could not feel them at all, and he would even feel that he was rather complete. However, as soon as he encountered a blow, the seemingly complete cultivation realm would collapse easily. In the end, he would fall completely, and there would be no chance for him to turn things around. Now that he had the framework, although his cultivation realm seemed to have countless loopholes and flaws, its structure had completely stabilized. Its ability to withstand attacks could no longer be compared to before. A blow that could completely destroy his cultivation state before, to the current him, it probably didn't even have the ability to shake his cultivation state. Naturally, that was only in terms of attacks. In terms of further potential, there is a world of difference between the two of them. Previously, when there was no framework, his cultivation state was like a pile of sand. Although it looked extremely dense, as long as water rushed against it, it would naturally collapse. As for piling up the sand, it would require a huge amount of sand to barely be able to see some effect. But now, with the framework, this pile of sand was like a building frame structure made of reinforced concrete. With the same amount of sand, it was enough to form a skyscraper that could withstand the shaking of heaven and earth. A skyscraper that could support the shaking of heaven and earth. Clearly, if one wanted to make such a skyscraper taller, one would only need to stack a similar framework on top of it. Unless the foundation could not support it, one could make it as tall as one wanted. The difference between the two was self-evident. If it were the ruler of the dynasty, it would be the same. Before he realized the key to the worldview, although he could use the dynasty's continuous communication with the endless world around him to strengthen himself. However, no matter how much he strengthened himself, the peak tribulation stage powerhouse was already his limit. When he reached the peak tribulation stage powerhouse, he might not even be able to completely control the cultivation realm, and power of a peak tribulation stage powerhouse, let alone improve himself through this kind of communication. Now, after realizing the key to the worldview, although he might not be able to break through the peak tribulation stage powerhouse and become a second tribulation powerhouse, there was at least hope. If he became a peak tribulation stage powerhouse, he would have the ability to completely control his cultivation realm, and power. Sensing that the weakness in his cultivation realm had completely disappeared, the dynasty's ruler was extremely glad. All of a sudden, even his obsession with venerable Yuan Bai seemed to have weakened a lot. No matter what, the dynasty's ruler was a cultivator. As a cultivator, the improvement of cultivation realm was obviously the most important and attractive thing to him. In the past, he felt that other things were more important because he could not see any hope and could not find a way to improve his cultivation realm. Now that he discovered that there was a boundless world in front of him and that he had grasped the key to improve, it seemed like he only needed to take a step forward to obtain the improvement that he could not obtain in the past. How could his mentality not change? At that moment, he no longer hesitated and casually made arrangements for the dynasty's matters. He directly disappeared and began to wholeheartedly focus on the communication between the dynasty's world and the other endless worlds. Through this kind of communication, he slowly summarized as many ideas and filled in the gaps and loopholes left behind in his cultivation realm in the past. As for whether there would be problems with the dynasty due to him being a hands-off leader, there was no need to worry at all. After controlling the dynasty for trillions of years, the dynasty's ruler had spent nearly 99% of his time being a hands-off leader. In order to adapt to the dynasty's ruler's style, the various rules and policies of the entire dynasty had countless corresponding regulations. Perhaps without the participation of the dynasty's ruler, the entire dynasty's operation would be smoother and smoother. Time passed quickly. Unknowingly, hundreds of millions of years had passed in the dynasty's world. After hundreds of millions of years of communication, the current dynasty's world was more than 100 times larger than before. Even if it was compared to the world that the dynasty was in before it transcended, the dynasty's world was not inferior at all. Aside from the size, there were many other aspects of the empire that had also improved greatly. The number of cultivators in the entire dynasty had also increased by more than 100 times. Among them, the number of supreme emperors was several times more than the number of supreme emperors in the world before the dynasty had ascended. Apart from that, there was a similar difference in the number of cultivators who were in despair and false saints.